Okay, welcome back, everyone. I'm Zoe Trahanis. I'm a lead disaster risk management specialist at GFDRR. So today, in our second day of partnership days, we are going to hear from more partners as well as beneficiaries about GFDR's role in advancing climate and disaster resilience through its support for countries in the aftermath of disasters and its effort to mainstream climate and disaster resilience across sectors, such as schools and the construction industry. So before we get started, let me just give you a few reminders in terms of housekeeping. So once again, if you need the agenda, the QR code here is on the screen. You can just take a quick photo of that, and they're also on stickers around if you need them. For anyone online or even here, if you'd like to watch this again, because it's so awesome, we are going to be recording the event, so you can always come back to it. Everyone will be muted by default during the presentations, and we are going to have Q&A sessions, so we'll keep track of those questions so you can also share your thoughts with us. And of course, due to time limitations, we may not be able to get to all the questions, but we will try. Okay? So let's get started, and I'd like to introduce Bruno Seligman, who's our Director for Strategy and Operations for the World Bank Sustainable Development Practice Group, to give us some opening remarks.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, and good to see many of you from yesterday. I think we had a very good set of discussions. We learned about nature-based solutions, about hydromet systems and services, about early warning systems, innovation and digitization, and how it can help us make better decisions in the face of the kind of risks that are associated with natural hazards. So today we have a natural segue from that, which is to focus on the importance of really being prepared for disasters. Look, we all know that with climate change, weather events are getting more frequent, they're getting more severe. And so we have to learn from our experience with disasters. We have to learn to soften the blow of nature. We have to learn to prepare communities. We have to learn to manage better so that we recover more quickly when these shocks happen, so that we are more resilient as a society, at the community level, at the individual, at the household level. Of course, you know, as usual in our business, when something bad happens, the worst affected are the most vulnerable communities and people. They are the most marginalized, they are the poorest, they are those who don't have access to services or who don't have a big pile of savings they can draw on, who don't have food in the pantry and, you know, a country house to go to or whatever it is. And so, of course, it can have a very profound impact on those vulnerable communities. And the road can be long, but you can also have the opportunity to build back better and to create more resilient, more sustainable, and more inclusive communities. So we've been working on this at the World Bank for a very long time to support recovery efforts. We've done it in many countries, and most recently, very prominently in the terrible disasters that struck Pakistan, the floods and earthquakes in Turkey and in Syria. So what these disasters have highlighted is the urgent need to build that resilience and to ensure that the recovery efforts are green, and they're resilient, and they're inclusive. So what does it mean in practice? It's about infrastructure being sustainable. It's about renewable energy. It's about ecosystem restoration. So it's about thinking about how you can reduce your carbon footprint at the same time as you're creating economic opportunities and jobs for communities, and you're strengthening climate resilience. So you have to walk and chew gum at the same time. And this is really what resilient recovery is all about. It's also about investing in disaster risk reduction itself, including building those systems that you can draw on when the crisis hits, so such as safety nets and social protection programs, including digitized programs that allow you to reach the poorest and the most vulnerable communities wherever they are on their mobile phones, health systems and the resilience of those, but also strengthen the ability of communities to come together to withstand shocks and recover quickly. The trust in individuals is an important aspect of that. So it's also about equitable access to services. I mentioned services earlier. Of course, education, employment, but also health. Ensuring that no one's left behind is a good aim for the recovery process. So that sounds like a lot. The good news is we've seen in action how this can be done in many different settings. A good example is the Philippines, where the capacity building programs on how to respond and recover from disasters better and faster, which were put into use in the recovery efforts after Typhoon Rai. So that's a good example where the investments have paid off. Another one is Mozambique, which focused on gender responsive and environment friendly recovery and resilience planning after Cyclone Idai. Or Idai, I'm not sure how you're supposed to pronounce that one, but one of the most recent cyclones there. So look, as we move forward, I think that a strong priority on having resilient recovery, building more sustainable communities, societies, countries, and really thinking through what a more inclusive future for all means is going to be absolutely critical. So I look forward to our discussion and wish you a very good panel. Back to you.
No, thank you so much, Renaud. I think those were great comments to set the scene. And really now what we're going to do is hear directly from some of our government counterparts, as well as our country directors and our teams really working with the government on some of these challenges, both in Pakistan and Turkey, following the devastating floods as well as the recent earthquake. So what I'd like to do now is invite, we're going to start with Turkey. Over the next 10 minutes, we're going to hear from our country directors. And I'd like to invite our Turkey country director, Humberto Lopez, to start us off. Hola, Humberto. I like your background.
Oh. You're still muted, Humberto. We can't hear you, unfortunately.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
I was saying that this is a picture I took in Ankara the very first time I came here. And anyway, listen, let me just share with you a few thoughts on how we manage the emergency response to the earthquake, and finally to ask a couple of pointed questions that probably you could consider going ahead, and particularly after what Renaud was saying, that preparation is key. But let me tell you, we are talking about two massive earthquakes affecting an area of 110,000 square kilometers. This is an area equivalent to Bulgaria, South Korea, bigger than many European countries. So the magnitude of the earthquakes is not just in terms of strength, but it's also in terms of the huge area and the problems that you may have in order to target the response in these particular cases. So what we did, the very first thing, was to start working on a great report. I see on the screen Lana Simpson, and she was the leader of the report, so she can basically tell you the stories about how this was done, etc., etc. But this was extremely useful for all of us for two main reasons. One of them, because it gave us the credibility in front of other donors, in front of the government, that in only a couple of weeks, we had a team that had already presented the first assessment of what it had happened in the earthquake, and that was critical. Indeed, after the grade, the government reached to us because they wanted to do a more elaborated recovery and reconstruction needs report that was presented in Brussels in a conference that was done in March, and clearly the bank was at the center of that debate. But the second part of what the great report did is to give us an idea of what we were talking about. not only how much was the damage that there was that it was caused by the earthquakes, but also where was the damage? Was it in private housing? Was it in public sector buildings? Was it basic public infrastructure, roads, etc., etc.? So for us, that was extremely helpful. Now, once we had the assessment, I think that we reached the conclusion that we have to structure our support around three main pillars. The main pillar was the recovery of the damaged infrastructure, and that was critical. And here, what I'm thinking again is roads, bridges, but also water and sanitation systems that in many cases were completely wiped out. So, and very difficult to pretend that the population is going to go back to their original villages if what you have is that you don't have water, you don't have sanitation, and so on. That was quite important also because the magnitude of what we are talking here, it was in the great assessment, we put a number of $34 billion. Recovery and reconstruction needs estimated by the government were around $82 billion. So it doesn't matter whether you put it at $34 billion or $80 billion, we are talking about an extremely high amount for recovery and reconstruction needs. The second part of our intervention was going to be focusing on public services. And what I'm thinking here is particularly health and education. Once again, when you have 3.3 million people displaced from the earthquake areas, it's very difficult that these are going to get back unless their kids are going to have schools. Clearly, they will need a housing, they will need the infrastructure, but they will need also a school for the kids. They will need access to health services and so on. And many of the hospitals collapse, many of the schools collapse. Just as a footnote and probably commercial, the bank had built 25 schools in the earthquake-affected areas. All the schools built by the World Bank are still standing. So that shows also that if you do things in the right way, probably we are going to have a better story to tell. And the third part, after the reconstruction of the damaged infrastructure and the provision of public services, was thinking about the economic recovery. This is an area where 99% of the firms are micro, small, and medium enterprises, and in many cases, they were directly affected because their infrastructure collapsed. In other cases, they were affected because the workers left the area of the earthquake and they couldn't find workers to basically operate the firms. And the final is because even if they have workers and even if they were not affected, there were so many economic disruptions in the affected area that many of these firms couldn't operate at that point. So once we have the what, and again, in part, the great guide us in going into this direction, we have to discuss the how. And there we focus on four main elements. The first one was looking at what we had in the portfolio. Luckily enough, in Turkey, we had a portfolio of $8.5 billion, of which around $5 billion is still undisbursed. And what we did is start looking at how many of these operations could be restructured, how many of these operations could be used to redirect resources to the affected areas. In that sense, we took 4 of our existing operations, we started restructuring. 3 of them are already disbursing resources in the affected areas that were not planned originally. The second thing that we did was looking at operations that we had already in the pipeline for this year. And we started looking at how we could modify the operations under preparation in order to adapt them to the new environment, which in some cases included expanding the coverage of the areas where we were going to implement the operations to the affected areas. But in others, it included the adding additional components. There is one operation on which I think I'm very proud. It's an operation that was designed to fight forest fires. you are going to be talking about climate change, probably that is going to be also very relevant because Turkey suffered of forest fires. And we had an operation that is preventive in that regard, and they are building some fire stations. There, what we were basically telling the client is, listen, if you are going to be working with the rebuilding of fire stations, once you start doing this, you may consider expanding the number of fire stations that you have, because in case of an earthquake, clearly they are going to be ready to support. So we were doing this type of tricks in many of the operations that were already in preparation to have something that in the future is going to be supporting future possible responses. The third part was the design of 2 new operations. We have 2 emergency operations. We are going to negotiate one next week, the other one the next week, and we are going to take them to the board on June 27. So they are going to be delivered this fiscal year, and they are operations for $1.45 billion. In one case, this one is an operation with 3 components: reconstruction of basic infrastructure, provision of public services, support for rural housing. The other operation is an operation designed for $150 million, designed to support micro, small, and medium enterprises. And as you see, they are well aligned with the 3 pillars I was telling you at the very beginning: reconstruction of infrastructure, provisions of public services, economic recovery in the affected area. And there is an additional part, which is the technical assistance. And we secured $1 million grant resources from the Global Facility from Disaster Reduction and Recovery in order to provide technical assistance to support the post-earthquake assessment and the planning, prioritization, and implementation of reconstruction investments in the aftermath. So, as you can see, quite a comprehensive menu of options, basically using what we had, what we were planning new things, and using technical assistance. Now, just one reflection, and I will close with that. When Renaud was saying before that we need to do something and to be ready, and this is extremely important, on December 31st of 2022, I signed 2 loans. And these 2 loans were designed to retrofit infrastructure, both public and private, in order to make it more resilient to natural disaster, including earthquakes. So it was a premonition of what it was coming. We're living in a country where quite a lot of the housing, more than half of the housing is estimated not to comply with codes that would be appropriate to withstand an earthquake. How do we do this type of things now? What is the amount? The amount of $1 billion needed to retrofit existing housing in the country is well beyond our reach, is well beyond the reach of the administration. How do we do these things? How we can become creative? How we can break the private sector? What are the type of things that we need to do? Because retrofitting these houses today is not going to be possible over the short run. And when you start looking at the amount of billions in needs and projects that we present in the 100 millions, clearly there is a total mismatch. With that, let me get back to you. I'm pretty sure that Alana, who's going to be talking after me, is going to give you quite a lot of information on Turkey, on what we have been doing over the past years, both on operations, on ASA, on type of technical assistance, etc., etc. And thank you for having me tonight. Bye-bye.
No, thank you so much, Humberto. Great overview, and we will have a chance to hear more from the team as well as the government. So now let's turn to Pakistan. So I'd like to invite Naji Ben Hassin, who's our Pakistan country director, to deliver a few remarks.
Good day in Washington. Good to see everyone, Humberto, Renaud, and everyone. Thanks for the invitation. And I was preparing for these few minutes of intervention. I was going through some of the documents, assessments that the teams had prepared at the time of this disaster. and supported by GFDRR. Let me just take you back. We're in August, and it's monsoon season, and obviously, not obviously, but mid-August, I'm on vacation in my country, in Algeria and in Europe, and I hear there's rains, a lot of rains in Pakistan, and it takes us quite a bit of time to realize what's going on because there's monsoon every year. And there was floods and catastrophic rains in 2010, but as opposed to a huge disaster as happened in Turkey and Syria, where you immediately know you're in the middle of such a tragic disaster, when the rain starts falling, you don't know how long it's going to last. And so it took us a few days to realize the magnitude of what was going on. And it turned out after a few days, basically, or a week or 10 days, that this was turning into the biggest flooding disaster Pakistan had ever seen from things were measured. And to take a long story short, I won't bore you with too many numbers, but Pakistan is a big country, 235, 240 million inhabitants. The census is ongoing. Huge country. 1/3 of the country after 3 weeks was underwater. We visited some of the parts, and the team who's joining, and who's probably some of them, Elif and others, maybe are probably in the room. I visited some of this area, and you should imagine we did a helicopter tour actually to visit some of the camps and refugee camps, and seeing sea all around you, a new sea in the middle of Pakistan, basically, with millions displaced, around 33 million people affected, more than $30 billion losses and damages and economic losses, as estimated by the post-disaster needs assessment prepared by the team with GFDRR support, and casualties of more than 1,700 and million cattle destroyed, etc. So a major disaster for this country, unseen before. So what do we do in these situations? And I have to say this was my first experience with a disaster of such magnitude. And I remember our very first meeting with a number of partners here, government officials, looking around the table and say, okay, what do we do now? What do we assess? And this is where I was extremely impressed, grateful, and reassured in the middle of the disaster of how the World Bank and other partners, with the support of the GFDRR, immediately mobilized a team. I was asking, so, okay, where's the team who's going to help do this assessment? And I'm hearing there's a team, and first time I heard of Elif, the task team leader of post-disaster assessment, and I'm being told she's somewhere commuting in some airport and she's on her way, and she's arriving this weekend. And that was a starting point of an amazing amount of work that involved many colleagues at the World Bank, in the government of Pakistan at the federal and provincial levels, because especially two big provinces, Sindh and Balochistan, were most affected, and the Asian Development Bank, the European Union, and the UNDP, all in one room, developing the needs assessment in record time with the government, a document that was owned by the government, authored by the government. So there was quite impressive convergence between different layers of the government, different partners working with Pakistan, and that's something, honestly, that was for me very humbling, to see how everyone came together. It took me a few weeks in these situations, you don't ask questions of, okay, how are we going to finance this, which project? But after a few weeks, I turned to Elif and said, by the way, do you need funding to do all this analytical work, preparing the post-disaster need assessment? And most importantly, preparing the reconstruction framework and supporting the government to prepare a reconstruction framework. And she smiled at me and said, there's this facility called GFDRR, which is supporting all of this. So it was absolutely instrumental, seamless in mobilizing not only the financing, but mobilizing the expertise to develop the post-disaster needs assessment and the reconstruction framework. Now, in the reconstruction framework, we're basically 1 month into, or 6 weeks into the disaster. And that's another piece that was impressive, is this the convergence and the seamless move between assessing the damage, preparing a reconstruction framework, and preparing operations and working, as Umberto described, working in our existing portfolio to identify a response. And there was no, usually we prepare analytical reports to identify issues, and then we move to thinking of what to do about it. Here in the middle of the disaster, the mix between the assessment, analysis, evaluation of the damage, evaluation of the priorities of what we should look at first. When you have millions of people outside of their homes, millions of homes destroyed, a whole crop production of the whole province of Sindh destroyed at 100%, where do you start? So basic things, there were more than 800,000 pregnant women outside. And the basic structure of the health support system in Pakistan with lady health workers was dismantled. I remember officials telling us they're looking for 75,000 lady health workers that they could not contact or identify because they were outside. Where do you start in these situations? And there, the post-disaster needs assessment that was prepared and the reconstruction framework became really, for the government, for us, for the partners, the guiding book to know where to start. And where to start was actually focusing on the poorest, getting cash in hand. Basically, in 2 weeks, we looked at our portfolio. We have like a $14.5 billion portfolio, 8 billion dispersed, and we identified immediately in 2 weeks, we were able to mobilize about $500 million for immediate cash transfers. Second thing, livelihood. You need to build, buy tents, buy water, buy medicine, and we had a precise idea through the PDNA of where these needs were, because this was done very closely with the local authorities, so we knew exactly where the needs were. So we mobilized our operations to buy these basic needs, and then you need to think about livelihood. And these floods hit the poorest districts of Pakistan, and these are farming areas. And not only they lost their crop season, therefore farmers were indebted. The urgency was to plant for the next season. We basically had a 2-3 months the government had a 2-3 months window. So we moved to supporting farmers to get cash crops in their hands and fertilizer to be able to plant and get to the season. Oh, and then you start thinking about operations, and we prepared about $2 billion of operations in Balochistan and in Balochistan soon, but in Sindh, emergency operations of $1.3 billion. We went to board in December. So I won't get into the details. The team will provide more specific, but I wanted to insist on this continuity between the needs assessment, the reconstruction framework, and literally in parallel, developing new operations, about $2 billion in total, and mobilizing funding in the portfolio. This is where development and emergency rescue totally overlap with this idea of building back better, which for me, before this disaster, was a bit theoretical. Here it was actually building a house better. It was building a school better, building a health clinic better, in a resilient manner, in view of probably, and that's the silver lining of if there's any of such a disastrous and catastrophic event, possibly providing infrastructure and services to the populations in the poorest districts in these areas, with services and infrastructure that is built in a more resilient and a better manner than what they had before the disaster. So I just want to end by thanking the team, thanking the GFDRR who could mobilize such expertise and such funding so quickly, and thanking the partners in this journey that is not finished. Of course, we're in the middle of it, and the government of Pakistan at the federal and provincial level, which had an impressive, quick response with us. As all these PDNA and all these documents testify, as these are government documents. Thank you very much. Sorry, I was a bit long, but it brought me back into memories of disastrous events that seemed long ago, but a lot has happened since then. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, you're getting applause for both of you. Oh, thank you, Naji. So now we're going to take a bit of a deeper dive and hear from the technical teams. So we're going to start with the Turkey earthquake response, led by Alana Simpson, who's our lead disaster management specialist in the Europe Central Asia region. So Lana, over to you, please. And please also for Lana and Alif, I can hear you. Just keep it to 10 minutes or less, please, because we're running a bit behind. Thank you. Go ahead.
I will try to be quick. So I think my presentation will be shown. Thank you so much, everybody in the room. And sorry, I couldn't be there in person. I actually want to take you a little bit on a journey since the 1999 earthquakes in Turkey and some of the efforts to build resilience, and particularly the role that GFDRR support has played in that journey. So after the 1999 earthquake, the Istanbul Seismic Risk Mitigation Project was created. And I think many of you in the room have heard about this because not only was this an incredibly successful project to look at retrofitting schools and hospitals, but it was also at a time where there wasn't many examples of risk reduction around the world, a model for what could be done in a megacity in a seismic zone. And just as one example with GFDRR support, we had the government of the Philippines come to Istanbul, learn about what was done, and from that exchange, Manila now has an earthquake risk reduction project. So GFDRR's support in sharing the lessons and the knowledge has been critical. What we also learned a lot about that project is very focused on Istanbul. It's been fantastic in mobilizing partner support after the World Bank moved to more national programs. So we've learned a lot, and I just want to share with you a bit of a journey through some of these projects. Next slide, please. So taking the schools model first, with some support from GFDRR, we were able to work with the Ministry of National Education to look nationally at the risks of the school infrastructure. Where is the greatest need? What are the costs? What are the sequencing? And where do we prioritize? At the same time, we're working with GFDRR on this important area. Of course, the crisis occurred and there was many Syrian refugees crossing the border, which put a lot of pressure on infrastructure, particularly education infrastructure. And with the great support from the European Commission, the World Bank worked with the government of Turkey on a resilient schools for Syrians under temporary protection and host communities. And under this project, as mentioned by Umberto, we've constructed 57 schools with 5 more underway. Of those, 26 are actually in the earthquake provinces, and those 26 schools stand today. They're shelters for people displaced, they're emergency hubs, and these buildings sustain, in some cases, no damage or very minor cosmetic damage. So it speaks to what it means to be resilient to earthquakes. We also have another project which is really focused on reconstructing high-risk schools across Turkey. And we expect by the end of this year or next year, it would have reached 100,000 beneficiaries. But as Umberto mentioned, we also pivoted after the earthquakes in February, looking at building 17 prefabricated steel schools where there are damaged or destroyed schools, which this will reach 21,000 beneficiaries. So we have this program, and it really does meet the needs of the Syrian refugees and the host communities, and now all of those people who are affected by the earthquakes. Next slide, please. We also recognize that across Turkey, there are many government buildings. So at a national level, if you like, centrally owned government buildings, hospitals, universities, critical administration buildings that are not only at risk from seismic events and other disasters, they're also energy inefficient. And Turkey has excellent regulations in the regards that you can't make a building energy efficient unless it also meets the seismic codes. So if we want to achieve a green future and meet the climate objectives that we want to, we also need to improve the seismic resilience. And GFDRR support has been fantastic in allowing us with the government, the Ministry of Urbanization, to look at global best practices. How can we do these energy efficient and seismic retrofitting faster, cheaper, and with less disruption? We can't always evacuate the buildings. How can we do it from the outside? This project was also critical in the week after the earthquake in that it was able to equip the thousands of experts who were deployed by the ministry into the earthquake area, who were assessing whether or not buildings were severely damaged, lightly damaged. So having these projects in place really did allow this quick response after the earthquakes. Next slide, please. The recent years have been also a number of disasters. 2020, 2 earthquakes. 2021 was the worst wildfire season Turkey had seen, and there were floods across the Black Sea area. What we see is that the municipalities, the cities, are very affected by these disasters. They see their wastewater treatment plants destroyed, bridges, and they need to also support their communities to recover. So looking at these needs together with the government of Turkey, we developed a new project which is aimed at supporting the recovery of municipalities in these disaster-affected areas. And also in the case of Turkey, this was the first project that recognized there could be future disasters and that there needed to be more flexibility built into the way that we respond. And of course, GFDRR support was incredibly useful in the assessment of the needs across these series of disasters. Next slide, please. But we also recognize, and this is what Umberto was also saying, there is a huge risk across Turkey in the housing sector particularly. And rather than wait until disasters strike, can we retrofit housing and reduce the risk in housing, reduce the risk in municipal infrastructure? So late last year, there was also a new project that was looking at citywide climate and disaster risks across Turkey. And this is focused on 5 very high-risk cities, including Maraş, which was actually affected quite heavily in the recent earthquakes. So this is really critical because it helps us think about how to scale, how to reach the many millions of risky buildings. And again, GFDRR support has been critical in the assessment of the risks, looking at how to address those risks through building municipal investments to be more resilient, and really also focusing on the vulnerable groups and the stakeholder needs, and how to design ways that meet the needs of more vulnerable parts of the population. Next slide, please. Next slide, thank you. But of course, on February 6, 2023, we had these 2 very devastating earthquakes, which were not only incredibly high intensity, they affected a very large area. And then on the February 20th, there was a further earthquake in Hatay. With GFDRR's very kind support, we were able to do the direct damage assessment within 2 weeks, to look at the direct damages and to work very closely with the government of Turkey on the assessment of losses and needs towards the donor conference. We also were able to support the government to look at where they may need immediate support, where we could retarget projects to support resilient recovery. And I really want to thank again GFDRR for always being there when these disasters strike, and also for USAID, who directed quite a lot of funding in the immediate aftermath towards these assessments. Next slide. As mentioned by Umberto, we have a project that's focused on micro enterprises, but we also have a project that's focused very much on putting into practice this idea of green, resilient, and inclusive reconstruction. This new project, which we hope to be approved in June, is focused on 3 areas. municipal infrastructure and services. Unfortunately, across the area, fire stations collapsed. We have a huge gap in our municipal services, but also health services, hospitals, preventative care, vaccinations, antenatal support were also affected. And in this area particularly, it's a very high poverty area and with a lot of rural poverty. So through this new project, we hope to address these 3 areas. And throughout this project, we've really thought about how to build back greener, how to make sure rural housing is energy efficient, but also not rebuilt in floodplain areas, but also looking at areas such as in the health services, providing disability services for those who are disabled or newly disabled by this terrible tragedy. And this project really aims for adaptive learning and sharing of best practices. And again, the support from GFDRR is going to be critical in this enormous undertaking. Next slide, please. And I want to say, after the earthquake, a lot of people said to me, but surely you've been working in Turkey for a number of years. Why are there still disasters? And I want to say there's huge progress in Turkey, but the challenge is immense. We know that buildings constructed prior to 2000 are less resistant to earthquakes. The building codes change through time, and that's more than 8 million buildings. So we need to think about fast, efficient, scalable mechanisms to build more resilient infrastructure and retrofit that which is already there, if you like, our legacy that exists. And it's not just Turkey, this is across the region and across the world. Next slide. And unfortunately, across our region, in the Europe and Central Asia region, Turkey is not alone. We face many areas with high seismic risk. In Romania, I'm currently based. We have really been putting a lot of thought into our emergency response. So you see here a picture of one of the Hatay fire stations in Turkey and a brand new fire station just north of Bucharest. So we're thinking that, okay, the challenge is immense, but we need our first responders. But when we think about first response, we also need to include women in first response. So even though there are not many professional female firefighters yet, we wanted to remove the barriers to their participation, making sure there are dormitories for female firefighters and paramedics, making sure there is disability access for firefighters who may be injured or for people with disabilities who may work in call centers. In Ukraine, with GFDRR support, we've been doing a lot of work on assessing the damages and the needs. And in Tajikistan and Kosovo, more work following obviously the challenges with the situation in Afghanistan, but then in Kosovo with the recent floods. So happy to share more examples. I just want to say, without GFDRR and all of your kind support, none of this would actually be possible. So Zoe, Sally, who's in the room, are available if you have any questions on any of our work in Turkey, and I'm always available if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lana. So now, yes, applause for Ilana. I don't know if you can hear it. Now I'd like to invite Alif Ayhan, who's our senior DRM specialist working on Pakistan, to tell us about the flood response.
You can tell me to cut it short. I'm in the room. Thank you so much. I think Naci's overview, very warm, very personal account of what we have been through, gave you a sense of what we faced when we went to Pakistan. Sorry? It's not working now? Okay, so I always forget how short I am. So, okay. This one? Okay, thank you so much. Naci's very warm and personal account of the situation, the disaster, gave you a sense of what happened in Pakistan. So I will not spend much time, but that 1/3 of the country was underwater is no small statement, not just in terms of square kilometers. that space, that huge space which covers, you know, the square meters of several European countries, it was underwater for more than 6 months. When we visited during the New Year's, the towns, cities, they were still underwater. So although number of casualties, thankfully, was considered less compared to the size of the event, there were still almost 2,000 people died, but people affected is enormous, and displaced because of the event is enormous because towns are wiped totally. So we started with a grade assessment supported by the GFDRR, like mid-September, and the country team also prepared an economic impact assessment of the event based on the grade findings. Then, as Naci explained, we prepared a full-scale post-disaster needs assessment in collaboration with European Union, UNDP, and Asian Development Bank, led by the government. And on the screen, you see the main findings. In terms of damages, housing sector and agriculture sector was hit the most. And in terms of losses, again, agriculture sector presented the biggest losses. You see the needs for housing sector less than the damages, and that's because the government has decided to provide a unit cost per housing, not the entire cost of reconstruction. And again, based on this analysis, we found out that most of the damages, losses, and needs were in Sindh province. Human impact of the disaster was also enormous. So almost 9 million people were pushed back into poverty because of this disaster. An additional almost 8 million people are now facing food insecurity. 17 million women and children are at greater risk of diseases. So more than 4 million people lost their jobs. And hundreds of thousands of women and girls are at risk of gender-based violence because of the conditions. When the government was preparing their recovery framework, social inclusion and building back better, preparing a framework for people-centered socioeconomic recovery was a fundamental principle of recovery in Pakistan. So Zoe is looking at me, so I will try to go a little. Yeah, I should emphasize that more. Okay, it's coming. And, you know, this was a disaster. Also, the country management unit did a great job in adapting the portfolio of the World Bank support into what's happening in the country. And they brought the Build Back Better and Resilient and Inclusive Recovery as the main aspects and described the pillars of response. And again, going back, September, the first grade assessment, September through October, detailed damage and needs assessment. And by December, we had a project of a package of 5 projects submitted to the World Bank board. So I must say here, all these 5 projects are informed through the analytics and technical assistance provided by GFDRR. The first 3, infrastructure rehabilitation, housing rehabilitation, and water and agriculture transformation projects are emergency recovery operations. So they directly respond to the to alleviating the damages and responding to the needs of the people. The other 2 projects, the health project and the social protection project, they were under preparation for a while, but based on seeing what's happening, both projects are adjusted to have significant components of resilient recovery in them. So you may wonder, I mean, the bank always prepares these projects in emergencies in record time, but then we usually face a problem in implementing them. So I'm very happy to let you know that infrastructure project has dispersed 122 million of that 500 million financing in less than 6 months. It's 23% of the project budget. Housing project dispersed 12%, agriculture dispersed 13%. So these are emergency operations which are under implementation with full speed, and we hope the results will also present success stories. So I have the details of the project's activities on the left side, and actually how it touches to the lives of the people on the right side of the screen. So under infrastructure project, we rehabilitate the damage happening in irrigation channels, roads, water supply, infrastructure. We provide livelihood support and also institutional strengthening for resilience and technical assistance, which is the forward-looking piece of the project, helping the Sindh province improve their capacity for emergency management. And through this project, support will be provided for more than 2 million of beneficiaries, and at least half of them will be women. And more than 200,000 households will be protected through flood protection insurance infrastructure. And at least half of it will also receive short-term livelihood support, and some 30% of it, of the support, will be allocated for female-headed households. So on and so forth. I will continue just to be fast, but Lana mentioned the need to include women in emergency management, emergency rescue services. Indeed, this is something that we are trying to do across the portfolio. And again, an activity that has started in the previous projects and continuing with the emergency project is to include more women in the rescue services in Sindh and help the victims, vulnerable population in a way that is really a good fit for the society and community practices. So our goal under the emergency recovery project is to expand the female participation in emergency rescue services to 15% by the end. And this is the housing reconstruction project. This is really an interesting one, and primarily follows a pattern that the World Bank provides housing reconstruction grants to the homeowners. And the government established a semi-independent company to manage this process. And through this, 350,000 core housing units will be reconstructed, hopefully up to better standards and to better withstand the floods and impacts of climate change. So 50% of the beneficiaries will be female-headed households, and they will receive subsidy cash grants. And they will also receive cash for work support under this project. Again, some highlights of the housing reconstruction. We prioritize women-headed households, families with single women and elderly persons with disabilities, and really the bottom percent of the population when it comes to poverty. So those households are prioritized. And of course, these are usually farmers' populations, and as Naji mentioned, very poor parts of the country, and many of them maybe don't have the legal rights to the land that they live on. So through the project, legal assistance and advice will be provided to them to defend their rights. And yeah, this is just a few examples from the results. So maybe I will focus on the social outcomes. This is the water and agriculture project, which has a very specific flood emergency response component aiming at helping farmer populations and especially small farmers through cash transfer. And all of these emergency recovery operations have social inclusion or inclusive DRM at the core of their design. And here, the cash for work component prioritized targeted outreach to women-headed households and marginalized groups. And the data and evidence about implementation progress will be, of course, gender disaggregated and will present different vulnerabilities of the beneficiaries. I told about the support for asserting their legal rights and property rights, which is very critical. And also the provincial government of Sindh is willing and ready to consider these claims. So at the end of the reconstruction, hopefully people will have not just a safe house, but a house that they own. Yeah, okay. So last but not least, overall financial management and supervision support will be provided. And again, through GFDRR support, the project implementation unit and the managers already started to have knowledge exchange with some of the other countries in our region, such as Nepal, who present a very good case example for job creation, supporting women entrepreneurs, even training women as masons and construction workers. Thank you.
No, thank you, Alif. So I hope this gives you, it's a lot of rich and detailed information, no? About, just go ahead and sit, it's fine. About these two disasters and how not only the World Bank, but partners and of course the governments leading the way have been responding. So with that, I'd like to now turn to our panel. So we have a very distinguished panel with us today and our colleague from the government of Turkey online as well. So I'd like to introduce everyone. So online, we have Mr. Kutluhan Taşkın, who's the Vice President for the Turkey Presidency of Strategy and Budget. So Kutluhan Bey, welcome. We also have in the room.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Kutluhan Bey. In the room, we have Mr. Inam Haider Malik, who's Lieutenant General, Chairman of the National Disaster Management Authority of Pakistan. Welcome, sir. We also have Ms. Christiana Mari, who is the Deputy Head of Division of Peace and Security, Disaster Risk Management for the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, for BMZ. And of course, we have Renaud Seligman, who is our Director of Strategy and Operations.
Directory sometimes.
Yes, for the Sustainable Development Global Practice. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask each of you a question and you'll have about 5 minutes to answer. And it'd be great if we can leave a little bit of time for also people in the room and online to ask you all any questions. And I'm going to start, Kutluhan Bey, with you because I'm so sorry that you're up so late in Ankara. Thank you for joining us. And hopefully we can see you on the screen if you're there. Okay. So, Kutluhan Bey, the damage and losses estimated in the government's TERA report were highest for housing and buildings, as well as critical infrastructure, such as the health and transport sectors. So it'd be great if you could explain a bit how reconstruction and recovery across these sectors will incorporate building back better principles to enhance resilience to future disasters. And I know Umberto and Alana touched on this a bit, but great to hear from you directly about this.
Thank you. Let me briefly explain how reconstruction and recovery will incorporate building back better. At this point, one of the main issues is integrating disaster risk reduction into infrastructure planning. The earthquakes have been an unfortunate lesson about the importance of building disaster resilient settlements and infrastructure. Our goal is to build back better with a recovery approach that aims at improved physical, social, environmental, and economic conditions and above all, protect people's lives. Our priority is to reconstruct safer housing with better social amenities and well-functioning critical infrastructure, such as schools, health facilities, water and sanitation networks, and transportation systems, so that affected people can begin to rebuild their lives after these devastating disasters. In order to protect them from future shocks and prevent economic losses, we have to enhance the resilience of all buildings and infrastructure. Therefore, we will integrate disaster risk reduction considerations into investment planning further and support local authorities in this regard. This includes conducting vulnerability assessments, considering hazard mapping, and incorporating resilient design features into the infrastructure projects. Understanding the risks and impacts of natural disasters is a fundamental step in building strong infrastructure. So we will complete our disaster risk maps to utilize our investments. Besides, currently we are preparing the 12th National Development Plan, which will cover the period of 2024 and 2028. Since disasters impede development significantly in this plan, we will mainstream disaster risk reduction and resilience for all sectors. One of the main issue of this point is strengthening building codes and standards. According to the analysis conducted by various institutions after the disaster, along the severity of ground motion, the main determining factors in the destruction of buildings were low bearing capacity of the soil, the deficiencies in the quality of buildings in terms of design and construction, the age of buildings, and the non-compliance of the construction of buildings with the legislation. One of the key aspects of building back better is ensuring that the structures rebuilt are more resilient to all kinds of natural hazards. Turkey has a strong commitment to improving building codes and standards by incorporating the latest knowledge and technologies to make buildings more resilient, as well as to improve building inspection systems. And this will be a priority in the reconstruction process. We will further install prediction and early warning systems and structural health monitoring systems to new and existing critical infrastructures to save lives and decrease the destructive impacts of disasters. Besides renovating the aging infrastructure with higher capacities, considering new climatic conditions and more efficient functioning, will also contribute to both climate change mitigation and adaptation efforts of Turkey. Regarding the retrofitting existing structures to constructing new buildings with improved resilience, we recognize the importance of retrofitting existing structures. Retrofitting is a cost-effective approach to enhance the structural integrity of buildings and critical infrastructure, such as hospitals and transportation systems. By identifying vulnerable structures and implementing retrofitting measures, we can significantly reduce the risks associated with the future disasters. Finally, another important point is engaging the community. The resilience cannot be achieved without the active involvement of the community. We will prioritize community engagement and the participation throughout the reconstruction and recovery process. This includes consulting with local residents, involving them in decision-making processes, and empowering them with knowledge and skills related to disaster preparedness and response. By working together with the community, we can ensure that the reconstruction efforts meet their needs and build their capacity to withstand future disasters. Considering all recovery goals, I think we can diversify the collaboration options with our partners like GFDRR and the World Bank in order to build back better and increase resilience of our society. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Kulohan Bey. Very good overview of the plans of the Turkish government. And also, I know Turkey always has been a leader on DRM as well. And we've brought many countries to tour and meet with the government about good practice on DRR. So Now I'd like to turn to the room, to our panel here, and I'd like to ask Chairman Malik, if you could please tell us a bit about the various measures that the government of Pakistan has taken through its Resilient Recovery Program. I know Alif and Naji touched on a bit, but it would be great to hear more about the National Disaster Management Authority as the coordinating agency for the flood response, how you were able to incorporate good practices of resilience, as well as some of the points Alif raised around social inclusion, which I think is quite innovative.
Thank you very much. I'm really very glad and honored to be here and be participative of this discussion, which takes into account the lessons learned from our past experiences and also makes a case study for our further collaborative interventions in this time frame, which is running very short upon the potential disasters which are in lying in waiting and threatening Pakistan and other regions alike. So once we are looking at our recovery from the last year's floods, we were also cognizant of the fact that there could be a recurrence of such kind of calamity again, and it could be we have a limited time to complete these assessments, our projections of damages and losses, and build our case better so that we could be able to attract sizable attention. And then we also see that since there are more than one regions which are awaiting global attention, so there could be a limited scope of investments that we should be able to look upon from outside and then build back more from internal and integrated indigenously driven schemes and systems which are responsive from inner perspectives. Now we started from not only capitalizing on the pledges that we have made in the Geneva, and we were glad that we could see that sizable support was there, but still it fell short of the required quantum of the support which was envisaged earlier, like $30 billion of losses. So if they are, the support is for about 1/3 of the damages and losses, definitely 2/3 has to be generated either from the private sector or indigenous local capacities or from elsewhere, or relegating parts of those developed projects, these development projects to the next phase. But I'm sure with the frequency of the disasters so rapid in these times, it will be very limited time available for relegating the project and taking on and revisiting them again. We started looking at this compulsive choice of having more number of reconstructions with adequate resilience or limited construction with ideal resilience. So the package could oscillate between these two choices, and obviously once the country is facing so many other disasters, so at times it has to face a difficult situation to find an option for more number of houses which are probably having just an optimal resilience embedded into it. But the risk that it brings along, that in case of next recurring flood or next disaster or emergencies, it may be subjected to the loss again. But if you wait for a longer period of time to build the adequate or full-scale ideal resilience for every structure, it will take more time, more resources, and probably the time is not there at the planning table. So we had invested in two prongs. The audit of the existing infrastructure is also being done from the resilience perspective to make sure that whatever is standing and is intact also is fit enough to withstand another one, a disaster in waiting. Or the new one which is being built, they should have adequate conformity with the global standards of resilience so that they are protected. And I'm sure we have seen from the earthquake experiences of Pakistan too in 2005, once we were subjected to a great catastrophe in our own times, it took decades, more than a decade time to recover and reconstruct fully from that disaster. And we know that although there are a number of disasters which cannot be anticipated, but there are still a couple of them which can be anticipated, projected, and the early warnings can be generated in time for the people, responders, managers, and the communities which are at risk, so that we can save earlier the lives and livestock first, and then we are able to recover from that time to have early recovery, quick recovery, rehabilitation, and then go on to a larger plan of rehabilitations. We also have also made it mandatory for all the new upcoming infrastructures, both in public and private sector, to have the clearances from the perspectives of the DRR, like DRR NOC for everything. And I'm sure once it cuts across to many stakeholders and other federal divisions and other ministries, everything gets connected to these type of conformity and then compliance related investments. And it's obviously great, injects lots of confidence into the other measures which are being offered to Pakistan, and the partners which are being connected and engaged and supportive of this long-term schemes. It will also bring them lots of comfort that whatever assistance is being parked there or being provided to Pakistan disaster affected areas is being utilized in the most optimal way. And people are also aware. I would say the last point could be the community awareness and mass communication with the people at the risk is also very important. And when we saw in the last floods, most of the people exactly didn't know what happened to them. But now this is the time that we know exactly. At times there are triggers, there are indicators which are available on the landscape which we must register now. Anything which is lying in the waterway is subject to the next risk disaster of any kind. And wherever there are overpopulated areas, they are at the risk of urban flooding and the related disasters as such. We can also have a lot of support from the science and technology to build those early warning trajectories, indication of likelihood of disasters in various areas where people are notified, moved, relocated, or trained to withstand the disasters. We understand they all could not be fought upon. We need to regulate and then see how we can deflect the impact of the disaster if we cannot fully withstand all, or we cannot blunt all in one go. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. Good to hear all the great work that you're doing, and it's been such a devastating disaster, so quite a bit to overcome and rebuild and recover. But Pakistan also has a lot of experience with this. I also worked in Pakistan in 2005 after the earthquake, and remember all the work that went into that and some of the amazing housing reconstruction the government did. Okay, so now let's move on to Ms. Amari, to Christian. So maybe, Christian, if you can tell us about what the role that donors like Germany, what do you think they can do to help countries ensure their recovery issues are aligned with long-term climate goals and contribute to building resilience to future disaster risks?
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm happy to give a few conceptual remarks, but also bilateral instruments Germany is using. And I would like to start with what Mami Mitsutori emphasized last Friday at the midterm review of the Sendai framework. She stressed again the need to move from managing disasters to managing risks, and to mainstream disaster risk management into public budgeting, expenditure, investment, and procurement processes. And I think that are really key entry points for resilient recovery. And we all know that governments spend most of their money on infrastructure. And this is really a key point to mainstream disaster risk reduction to have a long-term preventive effect. So that's really key for us here and also guiding us. Conceptually, Germany has developed the approach of the comprehensive risk management. And this is sort of a combination of instruments. It includes climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, disaster risk management, but also, for example, social protection. And this is that projects are set up and conceptualized, including all of those elements that are relevant to the specific circumstances, rather than using a series of individual measures that are siloed next to each other, so to say. That's really important from our perspective and allows also for long-term prevention. As most of you know, Germany puts a special emphasis on fragile and conflict-affected states. And I quote a number here from ODI, who say that still 58% of disaster deaths occur in the top 30 fragile and conflict-affected states. So this is where we're focusing on these states to support them. And one key instrument we apply there is our TDA. It's a Transitional Development Assistance. And it's a key crisis instrument we have, which sort of bridges the gap between humanitarian assistance and development cooperation. So it can be quickly dispersed. We have a budget line of 1.3 billion a year available, but it conceptually already included resilient recovery approaches, and sort of paves the way for longer-term development projects that can be then planned and implemented for a couple of years. And most of the TDA money goes to fragile and climate-affected countries. And for example, we also, of course, supported Pakistan. There were some joint programs also with the World Food Programme. supporting 400,000 vulnerable Pakistani by rehabilitation of community assets such as irrigation channels and agricultural land. And of course, we have sort of regional pipelines, but they're very adjustable and flexible to where possible disasters strike. And our normal budgetary lines in development cooperation are a bit more long-term, like in many windows of the World Bank, but this is some instrument that we can use sort of intermediary. And applying disaster risk management means really to factor in all potential risks and in all of the planning of the infrastructure. And that's why the World Bank is so key to us and GFDRR is so key to us, because you're already engaging and working with the governments on all the mentioned financial aspects that are relevant. And it's really an important trickle down that we all have to do in our own countries. Every country that subscribed to the Sendai targets is having to do the homework at home from the national to the regional to the local levels, and it's not easy, and it's more difficult possibly in federal states. So it's really a long-term effort, and it's constantly giving the tools, providing the tools to those who do the planning, and that's what we're trying to do at home, but what we're also trying with our bilateral development cooperation to support the countries in need. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. And so last but not least, I'd like to ask Renaud. So GFDRR provides technical support and grant funding strategically where it matters most and has a high likelihood of drawing in investment financing, as you know. And so, of course, this also applies not only to disaster risk reduction, but also to emergency preparedness, response, and resilient recovery. So given the impacts of climate change, and of course, the devastating disasters in Pakistan and Turkey are not the only ones that we're constantly supporting in response to, right? I mean, things happen worldwide. So how do you think GFDRR can scale up our impact in this area? What's some advice you might have?
Thanks so much, Zoe, and thanks colleagues online and here for the really super interesting presentations and experiences you've shared. So I was really struck listening to you by the the scale of the suffering, right? That we've heard about both in Turkey and in Pakistan. These are not marginal interventions. These are disasters that have struck to the very heart of the social fabric, that have affected many communities, that will affect them probably for generations. They will remember those floods. They will remember that earthquake. And so I guess it puts everything that we do in this space into perspective, in that at the end of the day, it's about the people and about our ability to shelter them collectively from some of the worst impacts. And we know that we're going to see more of these disasters, be they natural or weather related. And therefore, we do need to go to scale. Absolutely agree with you. And I think there are maybe 3 or 4 ways in which we can try to do that. One, of course, is to mobilize more funding, more financing. And this is something that, in a way, is at the heart of the evolution roadmap of the World Bank and the multilateral development banks, which is to recognize the scale of the challenges that we are facing, the fact that they cross borders, and the fact that we need more resources as a community to tackle them effectively. And I think on that front, the World Bank's done really quite well. There's a recent report from the Independent Evaluation Group that's shown that over the past 13 years, we have tripled our disaster risk reduction investments. And that, of course, has been strongly supported by GFDRR. So that's an example of mainstreaming of GFDRR kind of in practice. But of course, financing is not sufficient. We also need to redouble our investment in policy dialogue, influencing regulations. We're talking about building regulations in the case of Turkey. Of course, they're also relevant in many other contexts. You can have a huge amount of impact through building regulations, through aspects related to the whole system of disaster preparedness. And so we really want to emphasize the value of knowledge as one of the key outputs of this partnership. And you know, governments and countries, as they grow, as they get richer, they want to look around and they want to compare themselves to the best in class. And one of the ways to do that is to share knowledge about good practices that every country can benefit from very technical know-how to, you know, how to identify high-risk areas, how to prioritize climate risk management interventions, how that whole chain from a risk assessment to project design to implementation, and how to build better. I think that is really important. So financing and knowledge. But then it goes to the third aspect, which is, you know, knowledge is embedded in people and in the experts that we have. And I think, you know, that's where we need to think of how we can really ensure a global presence of GFDRR. Naji was talking about I think it was Elif or your colleague who was, you know, flying in on the day after, right? And I know that, you know, when the Turkey earthquake, if I'm not mistaken, it was on a Sunday, the same day already, there were already activities from GFDRR to start crunching the numbers and seeing, you know, what data we have, etc. So I think, you know, this global 24/7 sort of reach is really important. It's about partnering with others as well. It's also using best-in-class technology, such as Earth observations, machine learning. You know, the great global rapid post-disaster damage estimation is an example of that was used in Turkey and Syria and Pakistan and many other places. But, you know, it goes beyond that. It goes to the whole data analytics and the partnerships associated with that. So I think, you know, that is an important dimension. And finally, you know, if we step back a little bit from the immediate interventions in support of either one country or one sector, we can think of some of the cross-cutting issues that need more attention. And we heard it quite a bit from all of the presentations. One is gender. The gender dimension and the social inclusion dimension are extremely important because, you know, both for first responders, as well as to make sure that you're targeting the most vulnerable groups and giving livelihoods and job opportunities, you cannot ignore half of humanity, right? It's a very stupid thing to do, and it really doesn't allow you to get to sustainable results. So I think that's one area. The whole connection between fragility and disaster is another one, where you can have vicious cycles where disasters and climate risks create a cycle of violence and conflict, which then creates further inability to respond to shocks. So I think we need to break that cycle, and we need to think very carefully about those interactions and target our interventions accordingly. So really, at the end of the day, it's about us coming together as a community of partners that are supporting GFDRR, of clients that are benefiting from it and sharing their experiences as well and learning from each other. And of course, the World Bank as a connector of all of the above. But I am optimistic that we can scale and we will scale. We will walk the path with our partners. But I have no doubt that you know, we will rise to the challenge.
No, thank you. So this was a great discussion. I want to thank our panelists as well as, of course, Elif, Alana, our country directors. So we've blown the doors off our time already, running quite a bit late, but I do want to give, since we have such a great panel, I do want to give people a chance very quickly if there are a couple questions in the room. I got a WhatsApp from Yoko saying there wasn't any online yet, but if anybody wants to ask a couple questions, please feel free. Yeah, you can come up. There's a microphone here, please.
Thank you very much. Incredibly interesting interventions. In both contexts, there's of course the added underlying complication of conflict, both directly and indirectly. So I wanted to ask, to what extent considerations of conflict are being considered in your concept of resilient recovery?
Thank you. Chairman Malik, if you want to start.
Well, I guess that in case of disaster risk reduction and resilience recovery, the underlying statement would be if you invest in resilience, the output would be resilience. They will deliver resilience, no matter the environment could be hostile, fragmented, and conflicted, or maybe difficult. There are areas in Pakistan which were inaccessible for geographical reasons. They were inaccessible for security reasons. But still, the deliverance of basic rescue relief has been articulated in the way that it trespassed all of these barriers. And in times of those crises, I think there is general consensus on developing those common protocols which can cut across these barriers and then which can reach out to the communities, no matter how difficult it would be to make that impact of immediate rescue and relief. But I guess in the longer perspective, it would be easier for us to now predict with comfortable knowledge in the hindsight and the experiences that from where we have learned that how to design a specific audience-specific program and how to design and deliver those programs in times that they should be able to pass through it around those barriers of conflict and I would say inaccessibility, and then be able to drive that dividend which ultimately contributes towards that national outcome or the regional success of the community. There were challenges to go across some of at times the cultural boundaries because some of the cultural environment or the practices may not involve into large-scale community deliverances which are based on more than one stakeholders or maybe like a heterogeneous complex of deliverance. But I guess with the audience-specific development of those training programs, resilience-driven target initiations, and then investment in the early warning capabilities of those areas. Because if the people know well and they know they've been informed about those likelihood of these disasters well, they can from within their close communities, they can develop some of the safety protocols, some of the measures that can be taken by these communities to address them on their own. And when then if the things go spill over from one zone to the other, or they go and target more than one areas of vulnerability, then obviously we can involve them, people from multiple backgrounds, multiple ethnicities, multiple preferences, and then they can deliver a combined good, even for the sake of that disaster management phase. And then we can see how best we can move on from their experiences, because we have seen this, that if a disaster strikes, all are affected alike, and then the differential boundaries, they get diminished from that perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. So Gulluhan Bey, I think you're still online. So I wanted to also pass the microphone to you if you wanted to come in. Of course, Turkey is not a fragile conflict-affected country, but you did, as you're adjacent to Syria, you did have many refugees coming into Turkey, and how you handled that.
Thank you very much. Turkey has separated very generous budget for the refugees, for the Syrians people, and we have more than 30.5 million people in our country, and we also make some new policies after the earthquakes, special to the Syrian people. First of all, we determined their damage, loss, and needs, as well as our Turkish citizens, and then we also determined and calculated the total needs and budget requirements for those guys. We did not make a separation and discrimination between our citizens and Syrian peoples when making our buildings, and also we building back better the atmosphere and the environment of their social and economic positions. Now we are still trying to create new policies and new collaborations between the international institutions to make their living conditions better than before the earthquakes.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Is there any other question or from online before we wrap up? No? Okay. So with that, we will close the panel. I really want to thank everyone for your participation, to our speakers. Thank you so much, Kuluhan Bey, for staying up so late in the office with us. It's great to have you. And so I think, yes. So I think for now, we will take a very quick coffee break, about 10 minutes, and we'll come back and discuss safer schools. Oh, yeah, 10 to 4. Okay, 3.
10 to 3.
You got me. You got me. That's a trick question. Yes, 10 to 3. Thank you. Okay, so I think we're going to get started. Hope everybody had a good coffee and everyone online got to take a quick break. So the next item in our agenda, and we heard quite a bit about this in the previous session, so we're going to talk a bit more in detail about how GFDRR is supporting the mainstreaming of disaster risk reduction in schools around the world. So I'm going to invite Karina Ferreira, who's a disaster risk management specialist working on this topic for a while, to take the floor and tell us a bit more. Karina.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So I am also, before I joined the bank, I was studying earthquake engineering. And if you see the VR experience that is in the lobby next to the cafeteria, where you can experience an earthquake in a school, you will hear the story of Rosita. And Rosita is a student that she's in her primary school. She feels an earthquake, and the earthquake causes lots of damage to the school. And Rosita then decided that she wants to be an engineer, and she wants to contribute to build the schools that are safer. And this is a real story. This happens in Peru, and in that experience, the schools are real schools that are reproduced, and the government was able to develop a solution to make those schools safer. You will see also a video in Turkey where a student says that I want to grow up and be an engineer, also to build safer schools, because my school is safer, and I know the importance of this school to be safer. And you know, that makes me remember of my own experience and why I became an engineer, and why I joined this team of safer schools, because we believe that we can make schools safer. And you will see today that the concept of safety is very broad. It includes many critical development objectives. And I think this experience is shared by many of my colleagues. So I have today with me Sally, but we are a very large team. Many of you are actually in this room. Others are right now working on the ground. They are preparing with the government of the Philippines a reconstruction project of schools after the devastating tropical cyclones and earthquakes that happened recently. They are they are working in Pakistan in reconstruction efforts in the education sector. They are working right now all over the world. And today in this session, we will hear about what we have been doing over the past 10 years to reach this goal of making schools safer. And we will hear about specifically the work in Turkey and in Mozambique. So I will give the floor to my colleague Sally to introduce himself.
Thank you so much, Karina. This is Salih Buğra Erdurmuş. I'm joining from Ankara, Turkey office. I'm working as a senior disaster risk management specialist based in Turkey. Actually, I started to think about, I think being an engineer is a prerequisite to sit at the side of the desk, I guess, but I'm a civil engineer by profession. And I have been working for disaster risk recovery and mitigation projects since my early days of professional life. I started working at the government site just after the devastating 1999 earthquakes. And from the very first-hand experience, I was able to witness how people feel about the recovery actions, and they want to feel the government support on their side together with the international community. Now I'm at the other side of the desk with the World Bank and continue to support the people, especially the vulnerable people. Happy to be here. We will have a video from the Turkey schools at the earthquake region, how the schools performed just after the earthquake, and how they became shelters for people, and how they created confidence among the post-disaster lives of the impacted citizens. Yeah, that's all from my side. We can just start. Thank you.
So we will go to the presentation. So we will talk about the work that GFDRR has been doing over the past 10 years. So this has been a pathway to make safer schools. And as I mentioned before, safety here includes many development objectives, including more broadly resilience, but also climate resilience, sustainable and inclusive school infrastructure. But what is the size of the problem? So we, in collaboration with the risk analytics group in GFDRR, we developed what we call the global baseline of school infrastructure, which provides global risk indicators about the problem of school safety. These numbers that you see here is just for earthquakes. And so this is an underestimate of actually the size of the problem if we take into account all hazards. We know that on average, every year, 2,500 children can die in schools just because of collapse of school buildings. 35,000 classrooms are lost. 800,000 children learn in temporary classrooms without appropriate conditions because of disasters, and this represents about $3 billion in damages every year. We could also estimate that at least 1 million existing school buildings are highly vulnerable. So it means that they need some type of intervention, rehabilitation or reconstruction. This gives a dimension of the problem worldwide, and this is a global problem. So all countries are facing, because of one hazard or other, this same challenge. If we look at the situation within the World Bank, we could conclude through portfolio review that we have done a couple of years ago, that in the active portfolio of school infrastructure investments, at least 4 billion of those investments is at risk of tropical cyclones, and at least 3.3 billion is at risk of earthquakes. These are projects that are implemented by all global practices across the bank. about 70% of these investments are managed by our education colleagues. So this means that if these investment projects do not take into consideration objectives related to safety, resilience, inclusivity, sustainability, we are facing high risks in terms of the sustainability of those investments, and we can actually be investing in unsafe schools. On the other hand, this represents a very significant opportunity to address the problem of school safety, if those considerations are adequately integrated into the design of those operations and implementation of those projects. So this means that the operational relevance of the work that GFDRR is doing within the bank is extremely high, because the expertise to address these topics is within this team, this Safer School team. This is, as I mentioned, a large team of engineers, architects, disaster risk management, urban planners, etc. And we have been providing support to those task teams that are preparing bank-wide those school infrastructure investments. And there is a very high demand. And this is something that we have been developing solutions to be able to respond to that very high demand for that technical support within the bank. But in order for the bank to have a concerted action bank-wide to be able to utilize all those investments to effectively contribute toward safer schools, we need to have a common framework. So we need to, all of us, irrespective of in which GP or team we are, we need all of us to use the same standards and the same objectives. So the preparation of that framework is something that we are currently working on with our colleagues in the education GP and other global practices. And this framework is being built upon two critical lessons. One is that it's a fact that resilience is a global priority for delivering education, because our education colleagues say that school infrastructure is the third teacher after the teachers and after educational materials and curriculum. It means that if school infrastructure is not able to provide the level of service that is necessary, and when I mean by service, I mean safety, but not only safety, it means that that will affect the capacity of the system to deliver quality education and to address the learning crisis that our countries, our client countries are facing now. The second lesson is related with the point that I just mentioned, is that safety is critical, is important, but is not sufficient. And there are four key objectives that we need to consider to create what we can call a quality learning environment. First is that we have to ensure these learning environments are inclusive for all children. The second is related with building resilience of those learning environments. The third, fostering learning-oriented environments so that those environments are also conducive to learning. And the last one is promoting green learning environments. So it's how to also include climate change adaptation and mitigation within these projects. And our objective is then to create those improvements in terms of enhanced learning, provide better health and well-being to children, and foster positive relationships within those learning environments. But this is the framework, and we are working now in actual creating operational tools that will allow to translate this principle into the actual technical design of those school infrastructure projects and implementation. Let me just briefly now mention what has been achieved up to now and what is our three main lines of action. So this group in the GFDRR has been supporting 35 countries over the past 10 years. These projects have benefited more than 121 million students in about 564,000 schools. And we have been capable of supporting task teams in the design of investment projects in the total of about 3.1 billion. But as you have seen, there is demand to actually increase that table of support because the active portfolio is actually higher than that. And this is where we want to go in the next years. This type of support has taken the form of policy reforms, building technical capacity, planning capacity, institutional capacity within the countries, but also actual investment projects. So the idea is that we have been working with our client countries to create the enabling environment for them to be able to scale up this type of interventions. So the first line of action, and I recall what was mentioned in the previous session, the importance of knowledge. In the Safer School program, the knowledge has been essential to be able to provide that support to our countries. And we have developed two key tools: the Roadmap for Safer and Resilient Schools and the Global Library of School Infrastructure. We know that making schools safer is a long-term process. And the roadmap provides guidance to school infrastructure managers, to other bank task teams, to partners, step by step, the process of diagnosis, analysis, and planning. And the result of this process is a school infrastructure plan with very concrete objectives in the short, medium, and long term, an investment strategy and the implementation strategy. And the implementation of these projects have been supported at the technical level by the Global Library of School Infrastructure. This is the largest repository of information about school infrastructure vulnerability, this global library. It's really a library. It's a place that is public information. It's tools that are available to everyone about how to assess school infrastructure vulnerability, but also how to address the problem and how to design those solutions. So you will find more information about this in some of the publications that are available on the table, and there is also a website on the World Bank webpage where you can see information about the tools and also information about the projects that we have been implementing in the 35 countries over the past 10 years. This map gives an overview. You can see that most of these projects have been actually supporting investment operations, but they apart from, in addition to incorporating those objectives of safety into the design of those operations, these projects have been designed also to create a kind of a platform that can be replicated by the government in other investment projects. So they are they are creating standards, new standards. They are supporting policy reforms, and they have been building technical capacity, contributing with new designs for schools, and that has been very important also to mobilize more financing. So they are creating that example that countries have been replicating to be able to address the problem of their school infrastructure at large scale. And the last line of action is that increase that capacity within the bank, so the capacity of task teams and the capacity of governments, our counterparts. And to this end, we have developed three important tools. One is the framework on green, resilient, inclusive, and learning-oriented environments that I mentioned before, that creates that framework that can be consistently used across the bank to ensure that all of our operations are actually contributing to address the problem of school safety. The second is an e-learning course on the roadmap, which will be launched in July. And the third one is a school infrastructure project cycle toolkit. I was mentioning of the need now to have actual operational tools that allow task teams and our clients and partners to translate the principles of the framework into the actual design and implementation of operations. And this is what this toolkit is providing. So I will end here my presentation. If you wanted to hear more about the work that we have been doing, so we will be providing you, the contacts, and I think now we are ready to go to the example of Turkey with Sally. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we're gonna go with the video. Actually, the video footage is from the schools at earthquake region. And the footage was taken after the earthquake. And it mainly is about the performance of the schools that the World Bank financed after the earthquake. So, and the role of those schools, how they helped the people to restore their lives at the early days of the post-earthquake environment. Let's watch the video.
2023 in Turkey caused the deaths of over 50,000 people. In southern Turkey, over 2 million people had to be housed in temporary accommodation, and there was an early estimate of more than $34 billion of direct physical damage, with overall losses and needs of more than $100 billion. As the recovery and rebuilding process continues, a remarkable story is emerging of how recently constructed, seismic resilient schools withstood the worst of the shocks, and they have become temporary shelters, providing earthquake survivors a safe space, and operations centers for coordination and distribution of aid.
Mevcut okullarımızda ciddi bir hasar durumu yok. Depremden etkilenmemiş bile diyebilirim. Gittiğim baktığım kadar. Elbette bu bir mutluluk vesilesi değil bizim için. Bu kadar büyük bir afetten, bu kadar büyük acılardan sonra ancak teselli olur.
Büyük bir korkuyla yaşadık. Yine buna şükür. Çocuklarımız sağ salim, canlarımız sağ salim. En zor günlerimizde bu okul bize kapılarını açtı. Sağ olsun, Allah razı olsun. 5 aylık bebeğimle, 4 bebeğimle yollara düşmedim, dışarıda kalmadım, soğukta kalmadım.
These southern Turkey regions, home to over 14 million people, already had some of the highest poverty rates in the country and host more than 1.7 million Syrians under temporary protection. Since 2015, the Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery has provided support to Turkey on the development of its resilience agenda.
Specifically, government of Turkey's Safer School agenda is supported by the construction of up-to-date standard safe schools, reducing the risk in the long term, and also it helps creating a quality learning environment for the students under temporary protection and hosting communities.
Since 2017, Turkey's Ministry of National Education, with the funding from the European Union and support from the World Bank, have built 57 disaster-resilient schools, over 1,300 classrooms.
Deprem sırasında evdeydim. Çok korktum. Deprem olduktan sonra okulumuza geldik, okulumuzda kaldık. Sonra ailem, annem, babam, ben, kardeşim. Kendimi çok güvende hissettim. Çünkü buranın sağlam olduğunu biliyordum gerçekten.
There were 24 of these safer schools in the earthquake zone, and they proved their resilience. By late March, 14 were already back open, with more to follow, while 4 were being used for emergency temporary sheltering and disaster management.
Birçok velimiz okulu daha öncesinde gelip şöyle kısaca bir gezdi, gördü. Okulumuzun herhangi bir yerinde herhangi bir en ufak bir çatlağın, sıva çatlağının bile olmadığını gördü. Biz eğitim öğretim faaliyetlerimize depremden önce olduğu gibi sorunsuz bir şekilde kaldığımız yerden devam ediyoruz.
The project shows how infrastructure investments in disaster risk reduction can help save lives, bring hope, and provide safe spaces during the most difficult times.
Suriye doğdum. Savaş çıkınca Türkiye'ye geldik. Ben de benim aletimde. Okulu seviyorum. Herkese seviyorum. Müdürleri seviyorum. Hocaları seviyorum. Büyük olunca mühendis olacağım. Sonra okul yapmaya yapacağım. Sonra evler yapacağım. Evler olarak indiler diye kırıldılar evler depremden. Onlar için şöyle yapacağım çocuklara, adamlara.
Thank you so much for watching. Each and every time I watch this video, it becomes emotional, you know. This is the most satisfaction that you can receive when you conduct the work and you see that it's really useful for the lives of the people. I think we can shift to my short presentation. I'm just going to the other side. Actually, the video shows one dimension of the work that we are doing with the GFDRR support. And it also requires the recognition of multiple international institutions, including the European Union and the donor countries as well. So safer schools, in fact, is not something very new in Turkey, but it has a past. And it was built on many efforts throughout the years. Elif Ayhan is here. She was one of the frontiers of those studies when it first started in Turkey. I cannot see Joaquin, but he was also an important part of those efforts. Lana, Zoe, actually, you are all part of this good job. I was at the other parts of the bank at those times, but now I'm collecting the fruits, okay? Now it's my turn. Actually, Umberto and Kutluhan Bey talked a bit on the impacts of the earthquake in February 2023. What I can say shortly is that one single earthquake tripled the losses that were happening since 1990. And it's much more devastating than the 1999 earthquakes. What's its relation with the schools? For the educational facilities, the needs on the schools' recovery and reconstruction is around $2 billion US. Even in the case that the public infrastructure performed better compared to the private buildings. Also, it's important to note that in Turkey, exposure to climate-related hazards is worsening, including the earthquake-affected area. And also this disaster disproportionately affected women and other vulnerable groups. Actually, the Safer Schools journey started with the Istanbul Seismic Risk Mitigation and Emergency Preparedness Project. Although it was not under a streamlined program, that project, which I also was a part of, succeeded in retrofitting and reconstruction of more than 1,300 school buildings that reached more than 1.5 million students, with indirect beneficiaries around 5 million. So it constitutes almost 1/4 of the overall city population. And the financing amount reached up to almost $3 billion US. But it didn't stop there. It continued with the Ministry of National Education. And although the initiatives from the Ministry of Education started in 2006 with the World Bank financed projects, it became possible for the government to endorse Safe Schools initiative with the 2015 Sendai Conference, and it became a program. What did GFDRR support on the way forward? Actually, it was about the development and implementation of the National Safer Schools program, and it contributed to the needs assessment for school buildings, and it helped also to scale up, developing a scale-up strategy. So at the end, what are the results? The first results are the two operations that we have in Turkey. The first one is the Education Infrastructure for Resilience project that you have seen the video for. For this project, we have almost finalized the implementation, and the resilience of the schools were proved after the earthquake. The second operation is on the disaster risk management in schools. It's also supporting the recovery actions at the earthquake region. But it's, I think, important to say that we are only a drop in the sea. The government effort in Turkey is much more higher than this. Just for the simplification of the presentation, I'm not providing many numbers, but our value added is mostly on the development of the program and how to design the program. Actually, there are also budgetary constraints. It's something else that we can discuss. But at the end, with these two operations, what we are trying to achieve is resilient schools for all, including the vulnerable people. And it aims to reach more than 100,000 direct beneficiaries for the schools to be reconstructed, and more than 2,000 beneficiaries at the earthquake region. So important how you reach these results. Actually, you need to satisfy the quality learning environment requirements. These include seismic safety, land use planning, energy efficiency, fire safety, and also safety at workplace, universal access, gender-friendly spaces, safe bathroom and sanitary facilities. So these are the things that you need to consider very carefully at the design stage without no compromise during the implementation until the completion of the schools and even during the maintenance and operation. Actually, these are the dimensions that I was talking about. These are all, engineering, pure engineering, numbers, how to construct, how to implement, how to finish the physical infrastructure. But whatever you do, it's important how it is perceived from the community. So for that, there is a need for a communication plan and strategy. Even if you want to construct a brand new, fantastic school, as long as the community is not satisfied around, so it's not a success. So how can you achieve this? First, there needs to be some kind of an awareness for the community, and people should feel free to complain as long as they need to do so. There is always a social sensitivity you cannot avoid, but it can be managed to some extent. Also, you need to use the media tools very efficiently. Also, when you have people believe in your plans, then people start supporting you. The picture is from a couple. These old guys have donated their only land to construct a school building, as they really believed in this agenda of the government to construct resilient schools. And the school also started to serve for the Syrians under temporary protection. So there was no discrimination. It's important to make you people believe the business that you are conducting. Thank you.
Thank you. And from Turkey, we are going now to Mozambique. We will hear from the Minister of Education and Human Development about the comprehensive Safer School program they have been implementing in Mozambique. Thank you.
A experiência de Moçambique com desastres naturais recorrentes nas últimas décadas mostrou que há uma necessidade urgente de soluções a longo prazo que deem mais resiliência aos riscos naturais e recuperação após desastres naturais. Foi assim que foi introduzida a iniciativa Escolas Seguras, liderada pelo governo de Moçambique, financiado pelo Banco Mundial, através do projeto Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery. Tinha como objetivo geral produzir diretrizes sobre a segurança escolar e promover a construção de escolas mais resilientes. Também identificarmos aquelas áreas mais críticas, de modo a podermos melhorar e analisarmos alternativas para alcançarmos escolas mais seguras e também gerar consenso sobre diretrizes e medidas técnicas e a normalização do processo a médio e longo prazos para a construção de escolas mais resilientes a desastres naturais. Assim sendo, nós gostaríamos aqui de relatar os fatores de sucesso, que foram, em primeiro lugar, zoneamento e mapeamento dos riscos por tipo de desastres e por distrito em todo o nosso país. A criação do grupo técnico consultivo também foi um sucesso, garantindo assim uma abordagem mais holística e acordos foram também estabelecidos, soluções técnicas foram adotadas, mapeamos os locais de risco e também a cooperação institucional foi criada e garantida. Também foi estabelecida com este projeto, foram estabelecidos códigos, normas de construção adequadas a cada um dos riscos, porque nosso país é longo e tem características diferentes em cada região. Temos aquelas zonas que são mais afetadas pelos desastres naturais e outras não. Por isso, o projeto adotou as construções, as características locais. Entre 2017 e 2021, com o apoio do Banco Mundial, 1.100 salas de aulas foram reconstruídas, foram reabilitadas ou mesmo construídas, adotando essa metodologia de escolas mais seguras, de acordo com os novos padrões de construção mais resiliente, e beneficiou mais de 132 mil crianças. Este projeto que nós realizamos com o apoio do Banco Mundial, através do Fundo Global para a Redução do Risco de Desastres, foi fundamental, de modo a criarmos aqui a resiliência, darmos aqui o nosso testemunho de que o apoio do Banco Mundial veio reforçar as nossas infraestruturas escolares e, assim sendo, poderemos no futuro criar melhores condições para os nossos meninos terem melhores condições de poderem estudar. Queremos aqui não só manifestar, mas, acima de tudo, agradecer o apoio que temos tido para a criação de melhores condições para os nossos meninos. Muito obrigada.
So these examples illustrate that together with all of you, with our partners, with the government, and with the communities, and the communities are not just beneficiaries, they have been active partners over the past 10 years. There has been significant progress made. But there is also a long way to go until we can actually say that the schools are safe. So we look forward to continuing working together toward that goal. Thank you very much. I think we will now open the floor to a couple of questions or comments. Anything that you would like to share? Please.
Just a short comment on the resilience of schools. As I said, that since we are now in the process of evolution ourselves, the bank itself and the related all stakeholders, we need to standardize the definitions of resilient structures. I think that's a good time that we can do that, because the room that we are living in, we understand that for a given there's a roof on the top. So that defines the conference hall. So like that, if we embed this definition of resilience into the definition of a school or any infrastructure which is related to it, the examples like we learned from Turkey. So the embedded resilience will define the infrastructure of school per se, and thus there's allocation definition, and thereafter support should be related to compliance to those standards worldwide. Only then we can force the governments, public sector, private alike to go on the way and delivering those standards, safety protocols, which are critical and which are embedded. Second, I would say that we could also plan on multi-use of those buildings. Like we saw that there were schools which were used as the shelters. Why not some of the resilient existing infrastructure can be used for our schools till the time the schools are not safe or resilient enough to take on their independent task of the resilience. And thirdly, if that is not an option, or that's maybe a costly option, maybe distant learning, e-schools, versions of the schools can also take on some of the schoolings till the time the school is itself not resilient, or there is not better way of alternating the multi-use of this existing infrastructure as a school come other public utility department. Thank you.
Actually, thank you so much for these three important aspects. For the resilience of schools, you are definitely right that there needs to be a satisfactory definition what resilient school is. I think it has multiple dimensions. It's not only about seismic safety, because resilience is not only against seismicity. I think one lesson learned from the Turkey experience is the resilience against multi-hazards. So, for example, the Vice President from the Strategy Budget Office, Kutluhan Bey, was talking about the liquefaction, soil liquefaction. It's an engineering term. It means the soil moves and your building get drawn into the soil. So the building may be perfect, but it will no longer function, even if it stands after the earthquake. So there are multiple dimensions. It's the floods, it's the landslides. Yes, the codes are important, but also the planning, zoning is very important. And the building itself should adhere to also up-to-date standards. Energy efficiency, the climate resilience, and also it needs to be gender-friendly and also provide universal access. I think these are not only I think not only schools are bound with these standards. These standards should be universal throughout the country, and schools should also follow those. For the multi-use of school buildings, I guess starting at the design stage, this is something that can be done as long as the building has the necessary space and it can function for the multi-use after the disasters, but it should be in the plan from day one. This is doable, and school buildings are really to the point investments that can achieve this target. For use of other public buildings, schools, frankly, I don't know much about it, so I cannot comment a lot on that. But for sure, we can utilize the knowledge exchange with you and the institutions in Turkey. How to share the experiences in between two countries. Would be willing to pioneer that effort.
Thank you. Any other question or a comment? Okay, so I think this is the end of our session. Thank you for participating, and we look forward to continue this discussion. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you to the panel for the engaging discussion, great videos. I was also moved by both, actually, anytime I see kids and in schools that are safer, it's great. So now we're going to move on, and we heard a lot in this last session as well about the importance of building regulations and standards. So not just the building, but the regulations and how important they are. So I'm here, I'm going to introduce you. This is Ana Campos. She's our lead DRM specialist working in the Africa region. She's going to talk to us about a new report on building regulations for resilience in Africa, along with our colleague Keiko. Sakura. I was going to call you the wrong Keiko for a second.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is a great pleasure to be here today discussing about building regulations. And I don't think I have to tell you about the importance of building regulations because my previous colleagues in the previous panels have already highlighted. What we are going to share with you today is the status of the building regulatory environment in Africa. And why is that important? There was a gap of information and there is a gap of information in Africa in general about investigation, knowledge, and risk, but about the status of the regulations. Every time that we were discussing with a specific client and we saw the challenges that they have in building regulations, we didn't know if that was a specific case, an outstanding case, or it was the general situation of Africa. So we decided to conduct a research, and we have been working in this for 1.5 years. I'm very happy to say that is really hot out of the press. It just came out today, and we're going to be sharing it with you. It's outside after this presentation. Next, please. Oh, I have it here too. Okay, so what was the purpose of this study? Was really to establish a baseline of the current status of building regulations in sub-Saharan Africa, made a comparative analysis of the regulation across the different countries, and make recommendations on how to fill these gaps. Why this was important? Really to create awareness and to call the attention of the governments and the different development partners on the opportunities to really create an effective risk reduction environment through building regulations in the continent. In that sense, what we did is we created a survey. We distributed among the 48 sub-Saharan African countries. We received, in average, 1 to 4 responses from the countries. Those were sent to the national authorities in charge of the regulatory environment, to the local authorities in charge of the control and implementation and enforcement, but also to practitioners in the private sector to validate the information that we were receiving from the government counterparts. Those surveys were complemented with desk research, accessing directly the different documents that the governments had, and also verifying the information with several interviews. In this sense, we needed to create a framework for the analysis, and as someone was mentioning before, we needed to understand resilience to what? Resilience how? And for that, so we analyzed 7 different types of building provisions or building design provisions, from the classification of use, height, densities, to the structural stability, the inclusion of disaster risk parameters and hazard maps, and performance requirements, and fire safety to verify safety and resilience advances in these different specifications. We also analyze aspects related with universal accessibility, with services and facilities, but also specifications for green buildings. And of course, the enabling environment for the enforcement. So we analyze the building control requirements and applications, and not only for new buildings, but for existing buildings, for private and public buildings, and even for traditional or vernacular type of constructions in Africa. In that sense, I don't think I have to highlight why this assessment was important, but why was the first regional assessment that we conduct in one of the continents? Africa is the highest urbanizing region in the world, and it is expected by 2050, the population is going to double. That means that 88 billion square meters are going to be built in the next 4 years to accommodate those urbanization and population growth demands. The impacts of climate change are already evident, and we have seen that in the last 40 years, the number of tropical storms have increased 4 times, and the number of floods have increased 10 times. So in that sense, we are not only seeing the rates of urbanization, the rates of increase on the different climate impacts. Of course, in Africa, nobody thinks of Africa exposed to seismic also activity, but it's also one element to consider, and that is very important. But one of the most important elements is the chronic problem of low quality in the African construction context. 56% of the urbanization development in sub-Saharan Africa is informal. So it's not only the quality of 1 or 2 floor buildings that are being built in those hazard-prone areas, but also is what's happening with 5 to 8 floor buildings in the urban context. In the last 23 years, 200 structural collapses had happened in Nigeria, and not related specifically with hazards, is because the buildings cannot withstand their own weight or their own loads. The same is happening in Kenya. 87 buildings have collapsed only in the last 5 years. And I'm talking here about 5 to 8 floor buildings. So this is not only about the vulnerability of the informal settlements, it's the vulnerability in the built environment in the cities like Lagos and Nairobi. So the studies have confirmed that every dollar investment that is done in risk reduction, in improving codes, and informing risk-informed designs will yield $11 of benefit. So in this sense, let me show with you some of the key findings and some of the preliminary results. So lack of risk-informed and up-to-date building regulations. Of the 48 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, only 25 of them have any provisions related with designs. And those are not comprehensive and do not cover all the aspects of resilience, universal access, or green buildings that we are generally expecting. There is a high legacy of the colonial era regulations. Many of these countries still use some of the building regulations of the pre-colonial times. They have not been adopted to the context of the climate and the different hazards of the country. So we cannot compare the exposure that buildings have in Mozambique, for example, that they have in Portugal, because we don't have tropical cyclones in Portugal, for example. But I'm not talking also and only about complex building regulations for sophisticated buildings. It's a lack of provisions for common and small scale construction types. The lack of regulations even for the typical typologies and the typical materials used in the African context. But, and not last but not least, the need to improve the effective building regulation control. There is lack of capacity of the building authorities, lack of resources, and although most of the countries have regulations related with building permits, they are not really enforced. So let me show you some examples. So of the 48 countries, 3 countries don't have any building regulatory framework: Eritrea, Somalia, and South Sudan. Of those, 20 countries have regulations related with building construction permits, but no provisions on the regulations. So permit for what? Against what? What are you measuring on the building permits? Of the 25 the remaining countries, only 16 have some type of provisions, but they do not cover all the thematic areas or the aspect that we should be expecting to have resilient, green, and inclusive buildings. Only 9 countries have comprehensive provisions. 4 of them have not been updated before 2000, like Angola, Eswatini, Kenya, and Namibia. Although they are comprehensive, they are not updated. And only 5 countries have comprehensive regulations that have been updated after 2000, Ghana, Rwanda, South Africa, Nigeria, and Uganda. But they still have some gaps, as we were going to see ahead. So what type of constructions are these building regulations covering? Most of them are covering the typical imported typologies that we see across the world: steel, concrete, masonry. Very few of them are covering the typical constructions of adobe, earth or timber constructions typical in Africa. So what are the conclusions? That under half of the countries in the regions have some kind of provisions. They are not comprehensive enough. They cover some aspects related with classified use, structural stability, service of facilities, or universal access, but they do not cover all the aspects that are needed. Around half of them also have some kind of fire provision or fire safety provisions, but they are not detailed enough. And only 1/3 of those countries have provisions related with disaster risk management, any elements related with wind load, earthquake loads, or the impacts of any other type of hazards. So let me show some examples on what I mean here. So 14 countries have provisions related with wind loading, but only 1 country in South Africa has really a strong wind parameters to be incorporated in the design and have some wind-specific maps. So that means that countries, for example, like Angola, mention the need to design against wind and the walls to be resistant to wind, but they don't specify the parameters that have to be used for those designs or the specifications of how to link the roofs to the walls. So they have partial information, but it's not going to be effective enough because it doesn't have the information that the designers and the different professionals require. The same happens with earthquake loading. 12 countries have some information related with seismic design. Only Ghana, Rwanda, South Africa, and Uganda have more comprehensive specifications and have been updated after 2000. But let me just give an example, for example, of Rwanda. That is one of the most comprehensive ones. It doesn't have the detailed provisions to provide the buildings the ductility that they need. So although they have some hazard parameters and some specifications, it doesn't have all the elements required to really guarantee a good behavior of the buildings. So in that sense, there is a huge need and opportunity to improve the content of these regulations. From the enforcement side, also, the situation is very similar. So 45 countries have some ways of building permits or building controls, as I mentioned, but not provisions against which to compare with. But 14 countries, for example, require material testings, but those are not implemented. Only 17 countries require some specific permits after the constructions have been executed, but there is a lot of gap in the implementations. So although the regulations are there, the capacity of the cities and the different control agencies to enforce it is very limited due to financial and human resources limitations. So the results, increased loss of light and damages to property, and all the challenges that we are already seeing in the sustainable development. So what are the recommendations or the next steps? What we found is that 23 countries are working in improving their building regulations or developing their building regulations for the first time. So we have a huge opportunity to provide technical assistance to these countries to make it right, to make it comprehensive, and to use the latest knowledge and status in building regulations worldwide, to make sure that this is done through a participatory process that we involve not only the different government stakeholders at the national level, but the control authorities at the local level, communities, and the building practitioners to tailor whatever is going to be regulated according with their needs and with their capacity. So it's not only to import what already exists, but to be able to tailor to their needs. Conclusion, of course, obvious, a need to more up-to-date comprehensive building designs, but also to make sure that we tailor them to the specific hazards in each of the specific countries. As we were mentioning, is earthquake resistant, wind resistant, flood resistant, according with the hazards and the specific challenges that each of the countries are facing, and reflecting the changes in the different technologies, materials, and construction materials available in the market. One important aspect, we were able to verify that only 7 countries of the 48 countries in sub-Saharan Africa are saying that they are informing their building permits with hazard maps. So that means that how and where do we build? It is important if we don't feel those hazard informations at the local level, and condition and restrict any development according with the specific local context and the specific hazards in each of the cities. There is a need to fill gaps in the coordination between the planning agencies and the building permit agencies. They are working in a separate way, and we need to define better where and how to build to really get the effective resilient elements that we are looking for. I know everybody think, and I hear every time, I mean, and I am an earthquake engineer and I'm passionate about this subject, but everybody tells me, Anna, this is a complicated topic. It takes countries several years to get their technical work on building regulations and to get it approved. Why bother about it? I mean, it's obvious if we don't do it, it's going to continue happening the way that is happening, but we need to work not only in the complex and sophisticated building regulations, probably for the larger buildings, but in simplified provisions for the smaller buildings. The example that you just showed in Mozambique is an example of how we can influence, improve the construction in a specific sector in a country that doesn't have a building regulation. So we can go step by step. We can work in safer construction guidance for housing. At the end, it's almost 80% of the construction that is happening, and 1 or 2 floor buildings probably are the most frequent buildings that are happening. So we can work in parallel to create booklets, manuals, awareness, training for more affordable buildings in low-income sectors while we develop more sophisticated regulations and guidelines. But also there is a need to fill the gaps of the existing buildings. Due to the high level of informality, we need to generate recommendations on how to regularize and improve those existing buildings that today are not conforming with the building regulatory environment. One of the challenges that we found is that the information is not publicly available. The building codes are sold, probably sometimes expensive for the practitioners, and are not widely disseminated. So we need to change that. That has to be accessible online, available, free, and we need to really train and capacitate those that have to implement it. Here we have an example of Kenya, how through the e-government process, they have digitalized the process and create a system that allows to get a building permit in a faster, more efficient, transparent way, and that really can make this process easier to implement, and in that way more attractive for people to get out of the informal sector and try to do it in a formal way. Due to the lack of capacity of the local governments and the lack of resources, we need to find a way also how to prioritize and how to adopt risk-based approaches for building control. So in that sense, according with the category of the building, the type of use, the size, the square meters, and other different parameters, they can decide what type of buildings really need a stronger control measure and need some permits and probably visits within the construction, etc. So according with these categories, they can prioritize. There has to be also another strategy to bring the private sector to help in that process. And there is a lot of examples worldwide on how the private sector is contributing to improve those building control process to make it more effective and faster, so we can respond to the huge demands that the cities are having. Capacity development at all levels, national level for the agencies working in development of the regulations, at the local level for those in charge of the enforcement, but also professionals and not professionals related with the building construction sector, and even with the community to get a larger demand for safer, greener, and inclusive buildings in general. There is also a huge opportunity to work at the regional level. Most of these countries share the same challenges. Some of them are more advanced than others. So the opportunity to share across the different countries and to make this process more effective, and not all countries have to reinvent the wheel again and do it in a separate way, and working regionally can be a work of really leapfrogging this process and improve it in a faster way. So I have shown today a specific case of what Africa is and the challenges in Africa, but I wanted to finalize this presentation from according with what the global program is doing. We are working in more than 20 countries across the world, creating knowledge, building capacity, conducting building regulatory capacity assessments at the country level, providing detailed reviews and technical recommendations to some of those specific codes according with the government needs, and capacity building for testing, for process review, and for different mechanisms for the implementation. Thank you.
I think we need to move to the next session, but if we have any question, and also we wanted to mention that as a program, we are very grateful for the partnership because, you know, as Anna mentioned, many African countries, for example, they're still using like old British standard or, you know, any European code. And many people studied in the Europe. So, you know, they have very close kind of, you know, technical understanding of, you know, what is happening in Europe, for example. But in other regions, for example, in Latin America, Caribbean, they have more close relationship with US, for example. In Asia, we also see a lot of countries looking into example from Japan, Singapore, India. So, you know, we would like to, you know, enhance more kind of collaboration with the partners and our client countries. So we are very grateful for have this opportunity to interact with, you know, different countries' representatives. So yeah, if there's any questions on the floor. I guess we're all tired. Over to you, Zoe. Okay. No, thank you very much. It was a great presentation. It's an exciting publication and difficult to hear that there are no regulations in place in many places. It's a lot of work to do. Okay, so now we're going to move on to next, and I believe it's about our last item on the agenda, I think, before we close. So we are going to hear more now about the Disaster Fighters, which is a pretty creative communications campaign that brings together current and former cricketers
musical talent from across the Caribbean, and other influential figures to promote awareness about disaster preparedness in the region. So Joaquin is back. I'm going to invite Joaquin Toro, who's our lead DRM specialist from the Latin America region, to tell us a bit more. And we also have Tafa Misole, who's a singer and songwriter from Haiti, here to join us. Go ahead, Joaquin.
Thank you very much. So yesterday we did some magic. We are going to do something similar to that, but with the help of music. So I think, but there are two things. I want you to look at the video and listen if we have the sound. No sound? It has sound, but okay. No problem. We're prepared. No? Yes? No. Okay. I hope the videos work better. But we started to communicate risk and preparedness with some of the resources that the civil defenses had 3 years ago. And we realized that after some studies we did at the end, actually these studies are recently, that music increases the message liking, helps build trust, and lends relevance to the message. If we were able to listen to the music or the audio in the previous slides, we would hear a music of kind of a little bit of terror or mysterious, and the way you feel with that compared to a soundtrack that is more happy, more melodic, makes you feel something, and that helps you to retain the message. And also how we communicate this is very differently. If I come to a town and say, look, you have to prepare because the volcano is about to erupt, very few people are going to listen to me. If a leader of the community, or if it's a singer that is communicating that, and if that message resonates with you, the message will be much more clear. So I want you to listen to this. I hope music is going to work.
Hurricane fighter, we can fight to make it better. Disaster fighters are ready. Make a plan, make a plan, make a plan. Everybody come together, we make a plan. Somos los disaster fighters, luchamos contra los desastres. De las manos saldremos adelante. Recuerda, hay que tranquilizarse. Terremoto ni huracán, los desastres que se dan. Te tienes que preparar. Haz tu plan, haz tu plan.
Haz tu plan, make a plan. So just to tell you a little bit of how we started this in Haiti, it was, I mean, for me, and I was talking to Tafa, who's going to talk a little bit more about her experiences, is the Haitian people are the most resilient people in the world. You go outside of Haiti and you see kids smiling, people smiling after going through the worst. But at the same time, there's a community that civil defense was making efforts to communicate preparedness and response and etc. But the message wasn't arriving. And what we did, of course, in coordination with civil defense, but also with the community and artists like Tafa, Lolo, and others created a song in Creole, in French, with the rhythm of the Haitians. They have this love for music, and we were able to reach to more than that 5 million people. Actions using Facebook, because many of them use Facebook. Many of them use the radios. Radio reaches places where other means of communication didn't reach, and also cell phone text. And it was very successful. And then we saw the success of this and say, why don't we do this in the Caribbean? We replicated something similar. And we were coming out from COVID, and we were all depressed, no? Including you, everybody, because we were locked down. So, and how to communicate to people who are coming from a disaster, that another disaster is coming to you, no? We needed some more positive message. You are resilient, but you need to be prepared. And we were able to get artists, musicians. They built the song, they built the lyrics. Civil defense was providing, these are the kinds of messages we would like to see, and they created the song. Tafa was part of that creation as well. The rhythm, the songs, and the dance, but also we brought together, these guys are cricket players. Cricket is a big hook for the Caribbean. We had influencers, we have famous people coming together, and community. And this message was getting, all these videos were done by cell phones because nobody could travel. We couldn't send a crew to make the videos. And it was very successful. It was so successful that our colleagues in Central America asked, why don't you replicate this? Because we are also fighting the disasters. We have the same hurricanes coming. So it was a very nice replication of something that was created in the Caribbean, expanded to Central America. So this campaign became more than just a communication campaign. It was more a platform for risk communication, because the civil defenses of these small islands and countries in Central America spent a lot of time thinking how we're going to communicate, who can help us, the designs and everything. And with this campaign, with this platform, we were able to bring a lot of that work to the table, and the civil defenses were able to say, look, I want to communicate about volcano eruption. I want to communicate this message about hurricanes. So it was more about what is the message and how we communicate, who communicates. So it was very exciting. And then because of these partnerships, we had a partnership with NOAA and NOAA and NASA, and we brought the disaster fighters to the middle of the hurricane. The hurricane hunters, I don't know if you know, it's a agency that goes directly to the hurricanes into the middle, and we had some sessions with some schools with them and the International Space Agency. So I want you to watch this.
I'm Jonathan Shannon. I'm coming to you from NOAA's Aircraft Operations Center to learn more about these aircraft and how they fly around and into hurricanes. So be prepared every hurricane season.
Do you copy, Josh? Over. I have you loud and clear, and I'm ready for questions. Over.
If a hurricane is happening, can you see it in space?
To study and measure climate change from space.
In space?
We can see hurricanes from space. We are only 250 miles above you.
We are in this together. We're one team.
We're one team. And we had around... in both activities around over 500 schools participating, around 5,000 to 10,000 students, because one thing that we learned after is what they put something like this. The whole school was watching, although some of the students were participating directly, but it was an event that everybody was watching. So it was really connecting to the kids, those kids that Anita was mentioning, the building code. But if we don't start teaching them about preparedness, response, and being safe, later is harder. No, so I think we have been able to connect with music, with technology, with space under this risk communication platform, and the beauty is that we connected with artists. We explored a little bit of blockchain and NFTs as well. It was fun. And we used technologies like Twitter and TikTok. And TikTok, the video in the middle is a family in Trinidad and Tobago that took the music and started doing the reels themselves and affected really a lot of population in the Caribbean. It was really, really fun. And we had in Central America a sport woman who participated in the Olympics. And we had all of these musicians, sports, influencers. We connected to youth and elderly in ways that we haven't seen before. And when I say we, is the civil defenses of the regions. And I think this is a beautiful campaign, because from here, from Washington, that we are kind of almost in the space and connecting to the population on the ground was super useful. And I think a little bit of the impact in these 2 years, we reached in 26 countries, both in Caribbean and Central America, over 21 million people. We had over 40 influencers and ambassadors that together they had over 52 million followers. So somehow the communities got connected away from these two regions. We had a platform of risk communication. We had Twitter, TikTok, Canvas, all of these technologies providing training to the civil protections, risk communication agencies. We developed online family emergency plans that you go into the website and start saying, I have a dog, I have an elderly, so what can I do? And they had these actionable things to do in case of the different disasters. And really this toolkits for all the countries where I mentioned before, they focus on the message, not on the way and how to communicate this. We would like to go globally. Yes, why not? We have some requests from Africa, Nigeria, Philippines, and I think more I see this disaster fighters that started as a communication campaign. It's a risk communication platform, because all these activities, from producing of the video and songs, we have a methodology how to do it, the media kits, the participatory process that I want also Tafa to talk a little bit, reaching these different audiences that communication campaigns have not yet touched. It was very, very important. And finally, to say that this campaign won the silver. It was a silver winning of the American Advertising Awards for a social campaign. We just received that prize a few months ago. And you are welcome to participate on this, because we are in the same team. We're fighting the disasters and we want a better future. But I think more important than listening to me, I would like you to listen to Tafa, who not only has been part of this campaign, but also was affected by the campaign, and we want to listen to her story. Tafa, please.
Hi, everyone. How you doing? Are you good? Are you sure? I'm sorry, I'm Haitian. We love a smile. We love living our life. So it's a kind of like impossible to stay in a home like so serious, you know. So first of all, my name is Tafa Misolet. My real name is Saint Louis Evni Rose Tafaina. I think my mother gave me a lot, like for my whole family. So I'm honored to be there with you today. First of all, I've been my speech in French because in Haiti we speaking Creole, Haitian Creole and French. But I've been there listening to you and I said to myself, you have to talk to people, you have to let them hear you in English for me and for you, because I believe you can understand me. So I think language is a way to understand each other. So if you can understand what I'm saying, it's okay, right? So I'm a Haitian artist. I'm still living Haiti, so I'm here just for you. And I was born in Haiti, especially in Kinskov. It's one of the most beautiful part of our capital, like Port-au-Prince. Okay, and 3 years ago I received this call, and I said hi, and the person said it's Emiliano. I was like, who's this? And this person said, I'm calling you because I want you as an artist to help us. And I become 3 years after I become a part of disaster fighter team. And I am honored, I'm happy about it for some reason. I'm an artist, but I'm also a Haitian citizen. And most important being an artist, it's being able to help your people. Because if you're not able to help the one you love, the one you really love, the one you want to protect, what is the point of your music? What is the point of your art? And that's the most important thing for me. And when I received this girl, I've been talking to myself and I said, I need to be a part of disaster fighters because I need to help my people, because as I was saying, I'm an artist, I'm a designer. Yes, I did this, I made this. And Haitian people, I know Haitian people, and I was thinking, when you want to help a people, when you want to help a country, you cannot just come and do your thing, because you're helping people. But most importantly, you have to learn about the people you want to help. If you don't learn about the people you want to help, how can you help it? How can you help us if you don't know us? And that's why I accepted to join this team, because I know my people. He doesn't know my people. Everybody's learning, but I know my people. I'm Haitian. I know what Haitian people love. I know what Haitian people do, and I know one of the things we most likely we love the most is art. We are a people, a country who dream about art, who living of art. So our life turn around of art. So if you want to help us and you don't think about art, I think you're missing something. And that's why as an artist, I am happy to help my people. Because I was saying to Joachim this morning, sometimes you have a good message, you have a good speech, but you don't have the best way to make everyone understand your speech. And if you don't have the best way to make people understand your speech, you're missing your time. And you're missing your time. It's not beautiful it's not interesting to listen, but this is the truth. And that's why I was saying to Joachim, I am happy because I know my people and I can help you to learn more about my people. And Haitian people, we are a people who love life. We smiling. I think we are one of the most strongest people. I am pretty sure you've been hearing a lot of things about Haiti right now. It is hard for us. we're suffering. We've been through so much pain that as an Haitian, I'm impressed by myself. I was thinking, my people, you are strong. How can you smile when you lost everything? How can you smile when you're losing your friends, when you're losing your family, when the immigration is acting like this, when your family is I'm leaving my country. I love my country. I want to leave my country. I want to go and visiting every other space, but I want to leave Haiti, but I can't. So when you have people thinking like this, when you have people having the passport as the most precious thing, it is hard. Because we're thinking we have to leave our country, we have to leave our lands, we have to leave our friends, our family, and it's hard for us. So as an artist, I am, and as Haitian, I'm so happy because I can talk to you about how we live, what do we eat, what do we love, and all these things. And I think it was a huge opportunity for me because first I had the opportunity to work with one of the greatest group in my country, one of the oldest one, and it's calling Bookman Experience, and they could be my parents, so they are so oldest, and I was happy to work with them about the disaster fighter. We had a great time. We've been working together on the first song, and 1 year later, they called me and they said, we've been happy to have you, and we want you to do it again. And I was happy because I am a Haitian citizen, so I trust in freedom. I trust in community, the community life, how we live as a community. So I am happy to be there today. So if you have any question about Haiti, you can always ask me. But I want it to be clear for you. Even if you have a great message, if you don't have the great way, you're missing your time. And I'm happy I can help. Any other person who's not Haitian to find the best way to communicate how the people have to be prepared for the disaster and everything. So thank you. I hope you understand my English. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. And we invite everybody to the cocktail after, and you will hear not only her English, but her Creole and her beautiful voice in a performance that she's going to gift us. Thank you, Tafa.
You're welcome. Thank you. So looking forward to the performance, to experience the art. It'll be exciting. So we are coming to a close for today's session. So now I would like to invite Mr. Takahiro Suda, who is the World Bank's Alternative ED, Executive Director, to come up and give some closing remarks.
Good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I have a slight hesitation to make this closing remarks after hearing the very inspiring and motivational, uplifting speech from Tafer, but bear with me, I have to do this job. So, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, I'm honored to deliver, of course, these closing remarks on behalf of the Japanese government. First, I want to express my sincere appreciation to all the distinguished speakers who provided various insights and food for thought. I also thank everybody in the organizing team. Nothing could have been achieved without your hard work and dedication. So thank you very much. I couldn't attend most of the session, but I was fully briefed what has been discussed, and I definitely would like to congratulate everyone on that. Coming from Japan, one of the most disaster-prone countries, the disaster risk management always touches my heart. Building resilience to natural disaster has been one of the priorities in the development agenda. It protects the economy from the destruction stemming from disasters, and thus helps the countries achieve steady growth. In particular, it supports the poorest population who are often hit the hardest. the essential facilities such as transportation, power, water supply, communication networks, you name it, all of them are vital for maintaining people's daily lives. In this closing remarks, I'd like to briefly discuss what exactly resilient infrastructure means. They should be very familiar in particular after this intensive workshop. I just think that it can be a useful recap of this workshop as well. So obviously it has two aspects. So first, it could mean physically resilient infrastructure. Physically resilient infrastructure that is designed and constructed to withstand the impacts of climate change and natural disasters. Safer schools in Turkey, I think you had a lot today, is a case in point. In the earthquake-affected area, there have been 24 schools that were built based on GFDRRs and EU's support, and all of them had survived. And in addition, 4 schools were used by the Turkish government to provide temporary shelters. So resilient and safer schools have helped short-term response, such as food and shelter, but also long-term growth through provision of the human capital development. And second, equally important, it could mean social infrastructure. Of course, that includes institutions, governance, regulations, and safety standards, both ex ante and ex post. The bank, of course, is, I think, fully aware of this importance. I'm very happy to hear the presentation by Anna on the GFDRR's Building Regulations for Resilience Program, as it facilitates very helpfully regulatory assessment, capacity building, and knowledge exchanges in this regard. As you know, that last week at the high-level meeting of the mid-term review of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, delegates stressed the importance of strengthening disaster risk governance as well. So bottom line, we need to strengthen both elements in a well-balanced manner, and the GFDRR definitely provides a great opportunity to pursue these two goals. Japan is committed to contribute to global efforts to enhance resilience to natural disasters. We have supported the GFDRR for over a decade now through the Japan World Bank Program for mainstreaming disaster risk management in developing countries. But we are also increasingly aware, okay, so this is fine, that Japan has a strong partnership with World Bank, but more importantly, achieving resilience to natural disaster requires collective efforts, not only Japan, but also everybody, like all the stakeholders. So promoting collaboration and partnership among governments, private sector, academia, civil societies, the affected communities, of course, that is a necessary condition to build resilience and reduce disaster risk. As the next co-chair of GFDRR, Japan will continue to work together to all of you to build a more resilient world where people can live in safety and security. So I hope everybody agrees to continue our joint efforts in the spirit of collaboration, which I believe is a long-standing tradition of GFDR. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those remarks, Mr. Suda. So now I'd also like to invite Renaud Seligman. He's back. He's ready to close the event and wrap it up, and then we can head down to hear Tafa sing and have a cocktail.
So do it from here?
Wherever you like.
Stand, actually. I've been sitting all day. Well, friends, wonderful 2 days. Thank you really so much for participating in these discussions. Look, I think as we've said at different points during the day, at the end of the day, disaster risk and resilience is about people, and it's about protecting communities and livelihoods and opportunity for all in an inclusive manner. It's never been so urgent as it is now. I think there have been too many wake-up calls for the international community to let this agenda slide. And I am very encouraged by the thought that, look, the sky's the limit when it comes to GFDR. In fact, we've put one of our GFDR staff into space because, he's joining the Japanese space program. And And I think there's a lot that we can do to tackle together the devastating impacts and the combined impacts of climate, of conflict, and the lingering effects of the pandemic. But at the end of the day, it's about preserving the hard-won gains of development. And it's about helping achieve the Sustainable Development Goals together. And it's about doing it in a way that is smart, because it focuses on prevention, it focuses on preparedness, it focuses on reducing the impact of what we cannot control and controlling what we can. And so, if you'd like to learn more about GFDRR and the amazing work that is done by the teams, of course, we're always here. You are welcome to look at our recently published annual report and the website. Make sure you check out the Safer Schools virtual reality exhibit as you just exit the reception area of the East Dining Room. And there's also the photo exhibit from the Averted Disaster Award. So, plenty to look at, but I really want to thank all of you for each of your contributions, your financial contributions, your intellectual contributions, all of the staff for what you're doing every day, Niels and Bernice for their excellent leadership of this group, and all of you who have made these 2 days possible, especially support staff who have been on hand and doing an amazing job. So let's give them a round of applause. And so we'll see you at the exhibits and in the reception area where we can continue these important discussions over a glass of something or other. Thank you.